Throughout history, warriors have transcended mere flesh and blood to become legends shrouded in mystery. These figures weren't just fighters on some forgotten battlefield. They became symbols of courage, sacrifice, and something almost supernatural that continues to echo across centuries. Think about that for a moment. How does a person become more than human? How does their story twist and grow until it's woven into the very fabric of our collective imagination? It's as if these warriors stepped out of time itself, leaving behind not just deeds, but dream stories so powerful they still give us chills, still make us wonder what really happened all those years ago. Today, we're setting out on a journey to uncover 30 of the most enigmatic myths surrounding these timeless figures. From the shadowy whispers of Spartan elites who are said to possess almost god-like endurance, to the haunting legends of Celtic warriors who could supposedly command the elements, these aren't just tales. They're fragments of our deepest hopes, fears, and fascinations. Every culture, every civilization has its champions whose stories have been polished by time until they gleam with a kind of magic. And that's what we're diving into, not just the battles they fought, but the mysteries they left behind. The kind of stories that make you lean in a little closer, that stir something primal in your chest, a reminder that history isn't just dates and names. It's alive with questions waiting to be asked, so come with me. Let's walk through these echoes of the past together, peeling back the layers of myth and memory to glimpse the real people and the even more powerful legends that have captivated humanity for generations. This isn't just a list, it's an exploration, a chance to connect with the awe and wonder that these warriors inspired, and maybe, in uncovering their secrets, we uncover a little more about ourselves along the way. Are you ready to step into the unknown? Our journey into the unknown begins in ancient China with one of history's most formidable and ambitious rulers, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. His quest was not merely to rule the living world, but to conquer death itself. The legend we're exploring is the first of our 30 enigmatic myths, the belief that his terracotta army was far more than an elaborate collection of clay sculptures. Ancient texts and enduring whispers suggest these figures were intended to serve as an actual spiritual force, an immortal army bound to protect the emperor for all eternity in the afterlife. When archaeologists first unearthed these silent soldiers in the 1970s, the world was stunned by the sheer scale and individuality of the discovery. Each life-sized figure has a unique face, detailed armor, and a poised readiness that feels chillingly alive, but the mystery deepens when we look at the beliefs of the time. The Qin dynasty was a period steeped in profound spiritualism and a deep fear of the unknown. The emperor was obsessed with obtaining immortality, dispatching expeditions to find elixirs of eternal life. When that quest ultimately failed, he commissioned his grand mausoleum complex as a plan B, a subterranean empire where he could continue his rule. This is where the myth takes a darker, more enigmatic turn. While no evidence supports that actual living soldiers were entombed within the clay, the spiritual intention behind their creation is powerfully documented. Artisans and sorcerers of the era were believed to have performed rituals to transfer the essence of real warriors into these statues. They weren't just models, they were vessels. The ancient Chinese concept of hun, or spirit, suggests that a part of a person's consciousness could be anchored to an object. It was thought that by capturing the likeness and spirit of his most loyal and powerful fighters, the emperor could command an eternal guard that was both physical and supernatural. The arrangement of the army supports this mystical purpose. The figures are not posed for a parade. They are in battle formation, facing east, the direction from which the emperor's conquered enemies would have come. They are armed with real, functional bronze weapons, ready for a war in another realm. This wasn't merely art for admiration, it was a functional military deployment for a spiritual campaign. The level of detail is so precise, so intentional, it blurs the line between sculpture and sentinel. Could the ancient artisans and priests have believed they were creating something truly alive in a metaphysical sense? The texts and the context certainly suggest they did. So we are left with a haunting possibility. The Terracotta army may be one of the greatest examples of sympathetic magic the world has ever known, a spell cast on an unimaginable scale. It represents a breathtaking fusion of art, military might, and ancient spirituality, born from one man's terrifying fear of death and his unshakable will to power. They stand not as a memorial, but as a promise and eternal pledge of protection from an army that never sleeps, never dies, and forever guards the passage between our world and the next. From the silent, spiritual sentinels of ancient China, we journey now to the fierce and frozen north, to the world of the Vikings and a myth that is as terrifying as it is fascinating. Our second enigmatic legend is that of the Berserkers, Norse warriors said to possess the ability to channel the raw, untamed spirit of a bear or a wolf. These were not just angry soldiers, they were men transformed, consumed by a supernatural rage known as berserker gang. In this trance-like state, they were described as being impervious to pain, unaware of fear, and capable of feats of strength that defied all human limitations. They would froth at the mouth, grind their teeth, and let out animalistic howls, charging into battle with a ferocity that could break an enemy's line, and their will before a single blow was even landed. Historical accounts of these warriors are found scattered throughout Old Norse sagas and poetry. The Unglinga saga, for instance, describes Odin's own men who fought without armor, mad as dogs or wolves, and strong as bears or bulls. They would chew on their shields in a frenzied anticipation of combat, and it was believed that no fire or iron could harm them. This wasn't just poetic exaggeration. It was a documented phenomenon that struck genuine terror into the hearts of those who faced them on the battlefield. Their very presence was a psychological weapon, a force of nature unleashed by human hands. So what was the source of this otherworldly fury? Modern scholars have proposed several compelling theories. One of the most persistent explanations points to the deliberate use of psychoactive substances. Certain plants like henbane or hallucinogenic mushrooms, such as the Amanita muscaria, were known to be present in their environment and could induce states of euphoria, aggression, and numbness. Imagine a warrior, perhaps already in a heightened state of religious fervor, consuming a potent brew that blurred the line between man and beast, between reality and a vision quest. This chemical catalyst could have been the key that unlocked the door to the berserker rage. Yet, to attribute their state solely to drugs is to overlook the profound cultural and spiritual context of the Viking world. This was a society deeply connected to animal totems and the concept of fylgja, a spiritual companion or follower that often took an animal form. A warrior wouldn't just take a drug, he would undergo elaborate rituals calling upon the spirit of the bear, the wolf, or the boar to inhabit his body. He wasn't getting high, he was becoming possessed. This ritualistic transformation was a form of sacred theater, a way to tap into a primal power source that existed beyond the everyday. The frenzy was both a psychological weapon and a spiritual offering, a way to prove one's favor with the gods, particularly Odin, the god of war and ecstasy. The influence of this myth on Viking culture and warfare tactics cannot be overstated. The berserker was the ultimate shock troop, used as a spearhead to create chaos and break enemy formations. Their legendary status granted them a place of honor and fear within their own communities, often serving as the personal bodyguards of kings and chieftains. But this power came with a dark side. The sagas also tell us that when the rage subsided, these men were often left drained, weakened, and sometimes even mentally broken. Their gift was a double-edged sword, and their place in society was as ambiguous as their state of mind, both revered and isolated. The myth of the berserker endures because it taps into a universal human fascination with the boundaries of our own nature. It asks a profound question: what happens when we willingly surrender our humanity to access a greater power? The berserkers represent the ultimate loss of control in the pursuit of ultimate control on the battlefield. They are a terrifying reminder that the most formidable enemy our army could face might not be another man, but something ancient, wild, and utterly inhuman staring out from behind a human face. Leaving behind the frozen fjords and the animalistic fury of the north, we now venture into the sun-baked world of ancient Greece, a civilization whose myths have shaped our very imagination. Here we encounter our third enigmatic legend, the Amazons. This was not the story of a single warrior, but of an entire society, a powerful tribe composed solely of fierce, independent women who were said to rival the greatest Greek heroes in skill and ferocity. Their name itself was believed to mean "without a breast," stemming from the horrific tale that they would remove one breast to better draw a bowstring, a gruesome detail that speaks volumes about the Greek need to paint them as simultaneously formidable and unnatural. They were the ultimate other, a mirror held up to Greek society that reflected everything it both feared and desired. The Greek myths are filled with epic confrontations with these warrior women. Their queen, Hippolyta, possessed a magical girdle that became the target of Hercules' ninth labor. Another famed queen, Penthesilea, was a force of nature on the battlefield at Troy, where she was ultimately slain by the great Achilles in a moment that some poets described as being filled with tragic remorse for the beautiful and brave adversary he had killed. These stories were more than simple entertainment. They served a crucial social function. In the highly patriarchal world of ancient Greece, where women were largely confined to the domestic sphere, the Amazon myth reinforced cultural norms. They were a cautionary tale, a warning of what happened when the natural order was inverted and women seized power. They were the monstrous yet fascinating counterpoint to the ideal Greek woman, embodying a wild, untamed version of femininity that both terrified and intrigued the Greek male psyche. For centuries, these tales were dismissed as pure fantasy, a symbolic construct with no basis in reality. That is, until archaeologists began unearthing graves across the vast steppes of what is now southern Russia and Ukraine, the land once known as Scythia. The findings were nothing short of revolutionary. Buried with these ancient nomadic people were skeletons, and a significant number of them, initially assumed to be male due to the grave goods, were genetically female. These were not the graves of delicate princesses, they were the final resting places of warriors. Their bones showed signs of a life on horseback, and crucially, many displayed battle injuries. They were interred with their weapons quivers full of arrows, spears, swords, and armor, and in some cases were even dressed for war. This archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture of the real-life inspiration for the Amazon legend. The Scythians were a confederation of nomadic tribes, and their culture was far more egalitarian than that of the Greeks. For a people constantly on the move, everyone had to contribute to survival. Women were just as capable of riding and hunting as men, and when the tribe was threatened, they fought. To the Greeks, who encountered these skilled horse archers on the edges of their known world, the sight of such powerful women would have been utterly shocking. It challenged their entire worldview. It's easy to see how, over time and through the lens of rumor and epic poetry, these encounters were mythologized into the story of an all-female nation of warriors. The Scythian woman buried with her bow and her headdress wasn't just a fighter, she was the seed from which the legend of Hippolyta grew. The debate surrounding the Amazons is far from settled, and each new discovery adds another layer of complexity. Recent DNA analysis has only strengthened the connection, confirming that a notable portion of Scythian women were indeed battle-hardened warriors. This challenges the traditional narrative that warrior women were a purely mythical invention, forcing us to reconsider the intricate relationship between history and legend. It suggests that the Greeks weren't just making up stories, they were attempting to process and explain a very real, albeit profoundly different, culture they had encountered. The myth of the Amazons endures because it sits at the crossroads of fantasy and reality. It forces us to ask what we choose to believe about the past and why. Were they a complete fiction, a patriarchal nightmare, or were they a distorted echo of formidable, real women whose lives and stories were too powerful to be forgotten, ensuring they would ride forever through the halls of legend? From the sun-scorched plains of Scythia, where the echoes of real warrior women challenged the Greek world, we now turn to the misty hills of a Britain struggling to be born. Here, in the chaotic aftermath of Roman rule, a different kind of legend took root, one not of a tribe but of a single, shining king. Our fourth enigmatic myth brings us to the heart of Camelot and the timeless tale of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. This story is the very bedrock of Western chivalry, a powerful blend of history, magic, and an almost unbearable yearning for a perfect leader in a broken world. But beneath the glitter of the crown and the noble quests lies the core of a warrior king, a battle-hardened commander fighting to hold back the darkness. The historical Arthur, if he existed at all, is a ghost in the chronicles. In the 5th and 6th centuries, Roman legions had withdrawn from Britain, leaving the native Britons vulnerable to invasion from Saxon tribes. It is in this violent, fragmented landscape that we find the first faint whispers of a war leader. Early Welsh poems and the Latin text Historia Brittonum mention a Dux Bellorum, a leader of battles named Arthur, who is credited with winning 12 great victories against the Saxons, culminating in the Battle of Badon Hill. This figure was likely a Romano-British general, perhaps one of the last to still understand Roman military tactics, using cavalry and discipline to outmaneuver his foes. He wasn't a king in a castle, but a commander in the mud and blood of a failing province, a man whose real successes were so profound they became the seed for an eternal legend. This historical kernel was then polished over centuries into the myth we know today, largely through the work of medieval writers like Geoffrey of Monmouth and later Chrétien de Troyes. They transformed the battle chief into a sovereign and surrounded him with the iconography of divine right and magical power. Nothing symbolizes this more than the sword Excalibur. Unlike other legendary blades, its power was not merely in its edge but in its scabbard. While the sword itself, drawn from the stone, proved Arthur's rightful kingship, the scabbard was said to prevent its wearer from losing a drop of blood. This is a profound detail. It tells us the myth is evolving from a story about physical combat to a parable about enlightened rule. The greatest power isn't in dealing wounds, but in preventing them. The ideal king is a protector, a healer. Yet, the loss of that scabbard through betrayal also speaks to the inherent fragility of this perfection, a crack in the ideal that would eventually lead to Arthur's downfall. This pursuit of an impossible ideal is further embodied by the Knights of the Round Table. The table itself, round to signify that no knight sat at its head, was a revolutionary symbol of equality and shared purpose. Their quest, most famously for the Holy Grail, was the ultimate expression of chivalric virtue. It wasn't enough to be strong. A knight had to be pure of heart, spiritually disciplined, and dedicated to a cause greater than his own glory. Sir Galahad, the knight who achieved the Grail, is the ultimate personification of this, a warrior whose greatest weapon was his piety. But for every Galahad, there was a Lancelot, a man whose immense martial skill was tragically undermined by his very human failings. The Round Table and its quests present a complex picture, the constant and often failing struggle of flawed men to live up to a perfect code, and that is the true, enduring power of the Arthurian myth. It isn't a story about a golden age that once was, but a story about the eternal effort to build one. The fall of Camelot is not a failure, it is the point. The kingdom fell because of human weakness, betrayal, and fractured loyalties. Arthur's journey to Avalon, wounded, promising to return in his nation's darkest hour, transforms him from a historical figure into a perpetual symbol of hope. He represents the idea that the principles of justice, courage, and unity are never truly lost. They are merely waiting for the right moment to be awakened. We are still searching for our own round table, for a leader who can draw the sword from the stone, and for the grace to be worthy of such a legend. Arthur is the king who never truly ruled, and therefore the king who never truly died. But from the shattered dream of Camelot, we travel now to a land where history's wounds feel far more recent, and the soil itself seems to remember the blood that was spilled. Our fifth enigmatic myth takes us to the rugged and rain-lashed Scottish Highlands, to the haunting legend of the ghost warriors, the spectral armies of fallen clansmen said to return from the grave to defend their homeland. This is not a tale of a single ghostly sentinel, but of entire battalions of the dead marching in silence through the glens, their presence a chilling echo of a past that refuses to be forgotten, especially on the moors of Culloden. The historical heart of this myth is the Battle of Culloden in 1746, the brutal and final confrontation of the Jacobite Rising. It was here that the government forces of the Duke of Cumberland crushed the Jacobite army of Charles Edward Stuart, effectively ending the traditional clan way of life. The aftermath was not just a military defeat, it was a cultural massacre. The Highlanders were slaughtered, their language and tartan banned, their people scattered in what became known as the Highland clearances. In the face of such utter devastation, a story had to be born, a story that said, "We are not gone, we are still here." The ghost warriors emerged from this profound grief and defiance, a spiritual refusal to accept finality. Eyewitness accounts of these spectral armies span centuries, adding a chilling layer of credibility to the folklore. After Culloden, stories spread quickly among the displaced Highlanders. Travelers on lonely roads near the battlefield would speak of hearing the muffled drums of an approaching regiment, or the faint, guttural cries of men speaking Gaelic, only to see a mist coalesce into the forms of kilted soldiers before vanishing into the air. During the Second World War, a group of Home Guard soldiers on night patrol near Culloden Moor reported seeing a line of tall, gaunt figures marching in formation, dressed in what they described as old-fashioned uniforms. When they challenged the figures, they simply faded from view. As recently as the 1990s, a couple reported seeing two lone Highlanders standing by the side of a road, their faces etched with sorrow, who disappeared when the car's headlights passed over them. The cultural significance of these stories cannot be overstated. For the Scottish people, particularly those in the Highlands, these ghosts are far more than phantoms, they are the guardians of memory. In a time when their culture was systematically dismantled, the belief that the fallen warriors were still on duty became a powerful act of psychological resistance. It was a way to assert that the spirit of the clans could not be killed by canon or law. The land itself was alive with their presence, ensuring that every new generation would hear the story of what was lost. These myths were woven into songs, poems, and stories told by the fireside, becoming a vital thread in the fabric of Scottish identity and resilience. This folklore was also consciously used to inspire very real resistance against invaders. In the lead up to the Jacobite risings themselves, tales of phantom armies seen in the hills were circulated as omens of victory, a sign that the ancestors were marching with the living clansmen. The belief that you are not fighting alone, that the heroes of the past were standing shoulder to shoulder with you, was a potent motivator. It transformed a political rebellion into a sacred duty, a crusade blessed by the spirits of the past. Even after the defeat, the stories persisted, fueling a quiet, centuries-long resistance that ultimately led to a revival of Highland culture, language, and pride. The ghost warriors were the ultimate symbol of an unbroken line, a promise that as long as the stories were told, the cause was never truly lost. And so, the moors of Culloden stand today not just as a historical site, but as a place where time feels thin. The ghost warriors are a myth born from the deepest well of human emotion. The need to find meaning in tragedy and to assert that love for one's homeland is a force stronger than death itself. They are the eternal garrison of Scotland, a silent, watchful army that ensures the valor of the fallen is never erased from the memory of the land they died to protect. Leaving behind the misty highlands of Scotland, we cross continents and cultures to arrive in feudal Japan, a land of rigid honor and razor-sharp steel. Here, we encounter a warrior whose legend is not defined by a spectral army, but by the solitary, unbroken path of a single blade. Our sixth enigmatic myth brings us face to face with the Ronin known as Miyamoto Musashi, a man whose life story has become so intertwined with victory and mystique that it is nearly impossible to separate the historical duelist from the immortal symbol of the samurai spirit. The bedrock of the Musashi legend is his staggering, undefeated record. From his first duel at the age of 13, he is said to have fought and won over 60 life or death contests, a number that defies belief and catapults him into the realm of the superhuman. His most famous victory against the master swordsman Sasaki Kojiro on the remote island of Funajima is a masterclass in psychological warfare. Musashi didn't just arrive late to unnerve his opponent. He carved his wooden bokken or practice sword from an oar on the boat ride over, tailoring his weapon's length specifically to counter Kojiro's famed long blade technique, the swallow cut. This wasn't just winning a fight, it was dominating the very concept of the duel before a single blow was struck, showcasing a strategic mind that saw the battle as a chess game played with live pieces. But the myth of Musashi extends far beyond his invincibility in combat. In his later years, the wandering warrior seemingly transformed into a philosopher and artist, a transition that adds a deep layer of enigmatic wisdom to his legend. He retreated to a cave called Raigando and penned the Book of Five Rings, a treatise on strategy, combat, and philosophy that is still studied by business leaders and martial artists today. This text moves far beyond simple sword fighting tips, delving into the importance of timing, perception, and understanding the rhythm of any conflict. He also became a renowned artist and craftsman, creating powerful ink paintings and elegant sculptures. This evolution from a brutal, undefeated fighter to a refined sage creates a compelling paradox. The ultimate master of violence who ultimately sought to understand and express the principles of peace and natural harmony. It is this duality that cements his status as the ultimate embodiment of the Bushido Code, the way of the warrior. Bushido was not merely about skill in battle. It was a strict ethical system emphasizing honor, discipline, loyalty, and mastery over oneself. Musashi's entire life, as legend tells it, was a relentless pursuit of this mastery. His constant wandering, his Spartan lifestyle, his devotion to perfecting not just his swordsmanship, but also his mind and spirit through art and writing. All of it paints the picture of a man relentlessly dedicated to the path of self-improvement. He wasn't just a samurai, he became the archetype of the warrior philosopher. A man who understood that true strength is found not in the ability to destroy others, but in the ruthless discipline required to forge oneself. The cultural impact of his myth is immense. In modern Japan and around the world, Musashi is less a historical figure and more a timeless ideal. He represents the pinnacle of personal achievement through relentless focus and discipline. His story tells us that greatness is not a gift but a grueling path chosen every single day. He is the eternal Ronin, masterless and free, bound only to his own rigorous code. This makes him a uniquely modern hero, an icon of self-determination whose legend assures us that with enough dedication and strategic thought, any challenge, whether on a battlefield or in a boardroom, can be met and overcome. He remains undefeated not because he never lost a fight, but because his philosophy and his spirit continue to win victories centuries after his death. From the solitary discipline of the Japanese swordsman, we now turn to a story of profound connection, moving from the path of one to the power of two. Our seventh enigmatic myth takes us to the heart of ancient Greece, to the city-state of Thebes and its most legendary military unit, the Sacred Band. This was not just an elite fighting force, it was a radical social experiment built on a powerful and simple premise. The band was composed of 150 pairs of male lovers, the theory being that a man would never flee the battlefield if it meant abandoning the one he loved most. They would fight not just for glory or duty, but for each other, creating a bond on the battlefield that was believed to be unbreakable. The creation of the Sacred Band in the 4th century B.C. was a direct challenge to the military norms of the time. While other Greek city-states, most notably Sparta, emphasized brutal discipline and the suppression of individual bonds in favor of the collective, Thebes leaned into the power of personal devotion. The unit was formed by the commander Gorgidas, but it was the brilliant general Epaminondas who would truly harness their potential. He understood that courage fueled by love could be a more potent weapon than courage driven by fear of punishment. These men trained together, lived together, and fought side by side, their emotional connection forging a unit with a level of trust and coordination that was nearly impossible to replicate. This trust was proven on the field of battle, most spectacularly at Leuctra in 371 B.C. Facing the seemingly invincible Spartan army, Epaminondas employed a revolutionary new tactic. Instead of spreading his forces evenly, he concentrated his best troops, led by the Sacred Band, on his left wing, stacking them 50 men deep to create an overwhelming hammer blow aimed directly at the Spartan elite. The Theban phalanx, with the Sacred Band at its tip, hit the Spartan right with such concentrated force that it shattered their line, killing the Spartan king Cleombrotus and breaking the myth of Spartan invincibility forever. This victory catapulted Thebes to the forefront of Greek power, and the legend of the Sacred Band, the lovers who had broken Sparta, was sealed. For decades, the band remained undefeated, their reputation growing into a near-mythical aura of invincibility. But all myths meet their test, and for the Sacred Band, that final test came on the plain of Chaeronea in 338 B.C. They faced a new, formidable foe, the rising power of Macedon, led by the strategic genius of King Philip Roman II and his young son Alexander. Philip knew he could not defeat the band by matching their courage. He had to break their formation. He feigned a retreat, drawing the eager Theban left wing forward, and then his own son, the future Alexander the Great, led a devastating cavalry charge that drove a wedge into the Theban line, isolating the Sacred Band from the rest of the army. What happened next is the stuff of both history and legend. True to their creed, the Sacred Band did not break, they did not retreat. Surrounded and cut off, every single one of the 150 pairs fought to the death exactly where they stood. Ancient historians like Plutarch recorded that when the battle was over and the Macedonians were surveying the field, they found the band's corpses piled together in their ranks, each man fallen beside his beloved. It was a sight that reportedly moved the victorious Philip Roman II to tears, remarking that they should be utterly damned who suspected that these men had done or endured anything disgraceful. The aftermath of Chaeronea was a quiet, powerful tribute to their legend. The Macedonians erected a massive limestone lion monument on the battlefield, which still stands today, marking the communal grave where the fallen lovers were buried together. For centuries, their story was a celebrated testament to the power of devotion. However, as societal values shifted, their myth was often suppressed, minimized, or retold without its central, foundational element, their love. Modern scholarship has worked to reclaim this history, recognizing the Sacred Band not just as a formidable military unit, but as one of the most poignant examples of how the deepest human bonds can forge the most incredible courage. They were invincible until the day they weren't, but even in their final defeat, they proved their core principle true. They never abandoned each other, making their end not a tragedy of failure, but an eternal monument to the power of their pledge. From the unwavering loyalty of paired lovers in Thebes, We journey now to the far northern edge of the Roman Empire, where stone walls mark the end of the known world and the beginning of endless mystery. Our eighth enigmatic myth is that of the Legio Romana Hispana, the Ninth Spanish Legion, a formidable Roman force that, according to legend, marched into the swirling mists of Britain and simply vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind only a ghost story. The tale whispers that these 5,000 highly trained soldiers did not merely disband or fall in battle, but were somehow erased, transformed into an eternal phantom legion doomed to patrol the haunted moors for all eternity. The historical foundation of this story is compellingly real. The Ninth Legion was a well-documented, battle-hardened unit that had fought across Europe and indeed served in Britain, helping to crush the rebellion led by the warrior Queen Boudica. They were last firmly recorded in history around the year 108 A.D., stationed at the fortress of Eboracum, what is now the city of York. And then, the official Roman military records, the meticulous rosters that tracked every legion across the vast empire, fell silent. Their name simply disappears from the active duty list. For a major military unit to vanish from the record was unprecedented, a gaping hole in history that demanded an explanation. In the absence of facts, imagination rushed in to fill the void, and the myth of their supernatural disappearance was born. The most persistent and romantic version of the legend places their end in the wild, untamed north of Britain. The story goes that the legion was ordered to march north from York to put down a rising rebellion among the Caledonian tribes. They ascended into the highlands and were never seen again. The mist closed around them, and not a single man, not a shred of their eagle standard or armor was ever found. This narrative paints a chilling picture of the unknown dangers that lurked at the empire's borders. It suggested that the wilderness of Britain itself had swallowed them whole, that there were forces in those ancient woods and foggy hills that even the mighty Roman war machine could not conquer. They became the ultimate symbol of Rome's reach exceeding its grasp, a warning of the peril that waited in the shadows beyond the light of civilization. But what does archaeology tell us? The evidence points away to a far less mystical, though no less dramatic, fate. A key piece of the puzzle was discovered not in Britain but in the Netherlands. A stamped tile bearing the Legion stamp was found in Nijmegen, suggesting the Ninth was transferred there from Britain sometime after 120 A.D. Furthermore, a list of senior officers includes a commander of the Ninth who is recorded as serving around the middle of the 2nd century, decades after their supposed vanishment in Britain. The most plausible historical explanation is that the Legion was simply reassigned to the bloody and brutal campaigns along the Danube frontier, fighting in the Marcomannic Wars, and was ultimately destroyed in a major battle there. Its destruction would have been such a profound embarrassment to the empire, a loss not to mystical forces, but to a powerful Germanic enemy, that it may have been deliberately scrubbed from the public record to maintain an image of invincibility. Despite this evidence, the myth of the Lost Legion has proven irresistible, powerfully perpetuated by literature and film. Rosemary Sutcliffe's beloved 1954 novel, The Eagle of the Ninth, forever cemented the image of the Legion's mysterious fate in the popular imagination. Her story, and the films it inspired, follows a young Roman officer venturing north of Hadrian's Wall to recover the Legion's lost eagle standard and uncover the truth about his father's disappearance. These works aren't just adventure stories, they tap into a deep, universal fascination with unanswered questions and vanished history. They transform a historical mystery into a powerful symbol of the fragility of power and the relentless reclaiming of empire by nature and time. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Ninth Legion's myth is not about what happened to 5,000 men, but what their story represents. It is a parable for the fall of Rome itself, a slow, piecemeal disintegration where outposts simply go dark and are forgotten. The Phantom Legion roaming the moors is the ghost of imperial ambition itself, a permanent reminder that no power, no matter how grand or organized, is eternal. They march forever in our minds because they represent our own fear of being erased, of venturing into the unknown and leaving no trace behind. They are the echo of a question that will never be fully answered, and in that silence, legend finds its most powerful voice. Now we turn from legions lost to history to a singular voice that rose from the most humble of origins to change its course. Our ninth enigmatic myth is that of the warrior saint Joan of Arc. This is the story of a teenage peasant girl who, claiming direct communication with divine voices, convinced a desperate nation to arm her, led armies to miraculous victories, and became an eternal symbol of faith and nationhood. Her legend hinges on a profound and unsettling question. Was she a divinely chosen maiden, a strategic genius, or something else entirely? The context for Joan's incredible journey is the 100 Years' War, a brutal, generations-long conflict that had left France fractured, demoralized, and on the brink of collapse. The English controlled vast swaths of territory, including the key city of Paris, and the French crown prince, the Dauphin Charles, had not even been crowned, his legitimacy weakened by doubt and political intrigue. Into this atmosphere of utter despair stepped a 17-year-old girl from the remote village of Domremy. She presented herself at the court of Chinon, bypassing layers of military and political authority with an audacious claim. She stated that the voices of Saints Michael, Catherine, and Margaret had commanded her to do two things: lift the English siege of the city of Orleans and lead the Dauphin to his coronation in the cathedral at Reims, the traditional site for the crowning of French kings. Skeptical courtiers subjected her to intense questioning by theologians, yet she reportedly answered with a simple, unwavering conviction that pierced through their complex debates. What could have driven a powerful, albeit desperate, court to entrust its fate to an illiterate farm girl? It was a perfect storm of necessity and prophecy. A lingering legend in France spoke of a virgin from the borders of Lorraine who would someday save the kingdom. Joan, arriving from that very region, seemed to be the literal fulfillment of this prophecy. For the desperate Dauphin, she was a calculated risk, a potentially powerful tool to boost the morale of his broken troops and unite a fractured country under a banner of divine favor. The myth of her supernatural protection in battle was born at Orleans. Clad in white armor and carrying a banner adorned with images of God and angels, she arrived at the besieged city not as a frontline combatant who wielded a sword to kill, but as a strategic and psychological catalyst. Her presence fundamentally transformed the army's spirit. She dismissed the prostitutes following the camp, insisted the soldiers confess their sins, and turned a grubby military campaign into a holy crusade. The French soldiers, who had known only defeat, began to believe they were fighting for God himself. Under her inspiration, they achieved the impossible, breaking the siege in just 9 days. She was reportedly wounded by an arrow in the chest during the fighting, but after having the wound dressed, returned to the front lines, an act that seemed to confirm her invulnerability and divine favor to her awe-struck men. Her subsequent campaign to Reims was a continuous triumph, a march of liberation that saw town after town surrender without a fight, seemingly overawed by her reputation and the religious fervor that preceded her. The Dauphin was crowned King Charles Roman VII in the cathedral, with Joan standing proudly beside him, her banner in hand. She had accomplished both of her divine commands. This was the peak of her historical influence, and it cemented the legend of the maid who could not be stopped. But divine favor in the political arena is a fickle thing. Once Charles was crowned, his need for Joan's disruptive presence diminished. Captured by Burgundian forces the following year and sold to their English allies, she faced her greatest trial not on a battlefield but in a courtroom. Her heresy trial was a politically motivated sham designed to shatter her credibility and, by extension, undermine the legitimacy of Charles Roman VII, who was now tainted by having been crowned through the efforts of a supposed witch. Her judges focused obsessively on her voices and her insistence on wearing men's clothing, which she stated was a practical necessity for war and a command from God. The central enigma of her life, were the voices real, became the weapon used to destroy her. Modern scholars and psychologists have proposed numerous theories, from religious ecstasy and auditory hallucinations to a form of epilepsy. Yet, to reduce her experience to mere pathology is to ignore its transformative power. Whether divine or delusional, her conviction was absolute and its impact undeniably real. Her execution by burning at the stake in Rowan was intended to erase her, to prove she was a fraud consumed by hellfire. Instead, it immortalized her. Witnesses reported her calling out the name of Jesus until the very end. A century later, the Catholic Church, at the behest of a France now seeking to reclaim her as a national symbol, re-examined the trial, declared her innocent, and eventually canonized her as a saint. Joan of Arc's myth endures because it contains multitudes. She is the ultimate underdog, a symbol of pure faith triumphing over cynical politics. She is a feminist icon centuries before the term existed, a woman who shattered gender roles to lead men in a world dominated by them. And she is the poignant, tragic figure of the visionary ultimately betrayed by the very institutions she sought to save. Her story forces us to confront the thin line between madness and divinity, and the incredible power of a single, unwavering voice to rally a broken people and make them believe they are invincible. Moving from the divine certainty of a French saint to the shadowy certainty of a mountain fortress, we now journey to the ancient peaks of Persia. Our 10th enigmatic myth takes us to the realm of the Hashashin, a name that has echoed through history, twisted into the word assassin, and shrouded in tales of drug-induced fanatics who could strike anywhere, anytime without fear. The legend paints a picture of a mystical cult of killers, their minds unlocked by hashish and their souls pledged to a mysterious master known as the Old Man of the Mountain. But as with all powerful myths, the truth is far more complex and strategically brilliant. The historical reality of the Hashashin is rooted in a deep schism within Islam. They were the Nizari Ismailis, a sect that broke away from the mainstream Sunni authority in the 11th century. Persecuted and outnumbered, they found refuge not in open fields, but in a network of impregnable mountain fortresses scattered across Persia and Syria. The most famous of these was Alamut, the Eagle's Nest, a citadel so inaccessible it seemed to touch the clouds. From this remote headquarters, their leader, Hassan I-Sabah, engineered not a conventional army but a revolutionary form of psychological warfare. His followers weren't mindless drugged zealots. They were highly disciplined, patient, and utterly committed operatives in a long-term campaign for survival and influence. This is where the most persistent myth originates, the idea that these operatives were given hashish to glimpse the pleasures of paradise before being sent on their missions, thus ensuring their fearless loyalty. The term Hashashin, likely coined by their enemies, was a deliberate attempt to delegitimize them, painting them as immoral drug users rather than pious strategic opponents. While the use of cannabis might have occurred in some rituals, modern historians largely dismiss the idea that it was a fundamental tool of control. It was far more effective propaganda for their foes to claim their fearlessness came from a drug than to admit it came from a faith and discipline so profound they were willing to die for it. So what was the real source of their legendary loyalty and effectiveness? The answer lies in a grueling and sophisticated process of recruitment and training. Potential operatives, or FID, those who sacrificed themselves, were not found on the streets but were often born into the community or carefully identified for their potential. Their training was a slow, meticulous transformation. They were educated in languages, customs, and religions to blend seamlessly into any city or court from Cairo to Baghdad. They mastered the art of patience, sometimes spending years undercover, building trust and waiting for the single, perfect moment to strike. Their weapon of choice was often the dagger, not for its efficiency, but for its intimacy and symbolic power. A public assassination with a blade sent a shockwave of terror through the highest levels of power, a message that no one, not even a sultan in his own court, was safe. This was terrorism in its purest historical form, the use of targeted violence to achieve a massive psychological and political effect. At the center of this web was Hassan I Sabbah, the original Old Man of the Mountain. He was a master propagandist and strategist, not a sorcerer. He lived an ascetic life, ruling from Alamut with a reputation for unwavering fairness and deep theological knowledge. His power over his followers was built on ideology and intellectual conviction, not narcotics. He created a closed, self-sufficient society where his word was law, and the greater cause of the Nizari Ismaili state was the ultimate purpose. The myth of his mystical control was a weapon he likely encouraged. It was far more valuable for his enemies to believe he could command men to leap to their deaths for a promise of paradise than for them to understand the complex web of faith and strategy that actually bound his followers to him. The targets of the Hashashin were never random. They were meticulously chosen high-profile figures whose removal would create maximum strategic advantage, rival generals, Sunni viziers, and even crusader kings. Their most famous alleged target was Conrad of Montferrat, King of Jerusalem, whose assassination helped shift the balance of power in the Holy Land. Each successful strike was a calculated message to the empires surrounding them. We are small, but we can reach anywhere. Do not threaten us. This strategy allowed their tiny state to survive for nearly 2 centuries against the overwhelming military might of the Seljuk Turks and later the Mongols. The enduring power of the Hashashin myth lies in this terrifying efficiency. They were the ultimate underdogs, a David that didn't need a sling but instead used the power of perception to hold Goliath at bay. They understood that in geopolitics, what people believe to be true is often more powerful than the truth itself. By allowing and even cultivating the legend of the drug-crazed, paradise-seeking fanatic, they wrapped themselves in a cloak of supernatural terror that made them seem invincible. They were not superhuman assassins, but they were perhaps history's first masters of asymmetric warfare and psychological operations, proving that a single, precisely placed blade, wielded by a truly committed individual, could change the course of history far more effectively than any army. Leaving behind the shadowy fortresses of the Hashashin, we journey north and east into the vast, snow-covered landscapes of ancient Rus. Here, in the world of Slavic folklore, we find our 11th enigmatic myth, the Bogatars. These were not mere soldiers, they were epic heroes, larger-than-life defenders of the land who stood as a mighty wall against every threat, both human and supernatural. Their stories, passed down through generations in oral poems called Bylani, are more than just tales. They are the very soul of the Slavic people, a testament to their resilience, their faith, and their unwavering spirit in the face of endless invasion. The archetype of the Bogatar is perhaps perfectly captured in the story of Ilya Muromets. According to the legend, Ilya was no warrior in his youth. He was a simple peasant from the village of Karacharovo, and for the first 33 years of his life, he could not even walk, sitting motionless on the stove in his family's home. His transformation began with a visit from a group of mysterious wanderers, holy men who gifted him a draught of magical water and bestowed upon him a great destiny. The moment he drank, he rose to his feet, suddenly possessed of unimaginable, earth-shaking strength. This was no mere recovery, it was a rebirth. He was a hero who had been waiting, dormant within the very soil of Mother Russia, until the land itself had dire need of him. After saying a solemn farewell to his parents, he set out for the city of Kiev to serve the great Prince Vladimir, and thus began his legendary career of cleansing the land of monstrous foes. The threats Ilya and his fellow Bogatars faced were a fantastical blend of the real and the mythical, reflecting the deep fears and challenges of the time. He did not merely fight rival armies, he battled Nightingale the robber, a monstrous bandit who could kill with his whistle from miles away. He defeated Idolish, a giant representing the oppressive Totacons. He even faced down dragons and other creatures of darkness. Each victory was a symbolic cleansing, a restoration of order and safety to the common people. The Bogatas were the ultimate protectors, their strength always used in defense of the weak and the preservation of the homeland, never for personal gain or conquest. This moral code was as important as their physical power, setting them apart as righteous knights of the Slavic world. But where did these epic stories truly come from? The historical roots of the Bogatas are deeply entangled with the formation of the Kievan Rus state and its constant struggle for survival on the open steppe. From the south and east came relentless waves of nomadic invaders, the Pechenegs, the Polovtsians, and most formidably, the Mongol Tatars. These real-life conflicts, these generations of violence and uncertainty, provided the fertile ground from which the legends grew. The Bogatas of the Bylany are the idealized, mythologized versions of the frontier guards and elite Druzhina warriors who served the Kievan princes. They represent the collective hope of a people under siege, the desperate, powerful wish for a defender so strong that no horde could ever break through. The primary vehicle for these stories was the Bylina, a traditional oral epic poem sung or recited by traveling performers. These storytellers were the keepers of history and national identity, traveling from village to village and ensuring that the deeds of the heroes and the values they stood for were never forgotten. The rhythmic, melodic nature of the Bylany made them easy to memorize and pass down through centuries, long before they were ever written down. Through this living tradition, the Bogata evolved from a possible historical figure into a timeless archetype, his story adapting to reflect the anxieties of each new era while his core purpose remained unchanged, to stand and defend. The most compelling aspect of the Bogata myth is what these heroes came to symbolize. They embodied the concept of Mestnost, a deep, spiritual connection to the vast Russian land itself. Their power was drawn from the soil, and they fought not for a king, but for the very earth and its people. In times of peace, they would often patrol the frontiers, a silent, vigilant guard. But in times of great peril, the legends promised that the Bogatas were not truly gone. They were merely sleeping within the caverns of the sacred Kiev mountains, waiting to awaken when the motherland calls for them once more. This idea provided an immense sense of comfort and resilience, a belief that the spirit of resistance could never be fully extinguished. The endurance of the Bogata in modern culture is a powerful testament to this symbolism. Ilya Muromets, for instance, was officially canonized as a saint by the Russian Orthodox Church, and his relics are said to rest in the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra Monastery, physically connecting the legendary hero to the heart of Ukrainian and Russian spirituality. His image was invoked during times of national crisis, from the Napoleonic Wars to the great patriotic struggles of the 20th century, to rally the people and remind them of the dormant strength within. The Bogata is the ultimate symbol of the underdog who, through connection to the land and a righteous cause, finds the power to overcome any obstacle. He represents the belief that true strength is not something you are born with, but something that awakens within you when your people and your homeland need you most. From the epic defenders of the Slavic plains, we descend into the roaring heart of the Roman Empire itself, into the sand and blood of the arena. Our 12th enigmatic myth is not of a single warrior, but of a phenomenon, the eternal gladiator. These were men who, through sheer force of will and spectacle, transcended their status as enslaved property to achieve a bizarre form of immortality in the eyes of the Roman people. They became living paradoxes, revered celebrities, and despised outcasts, symbols of both ultimate degradation and untamable human spirit. At the center of this stands Spartacus, the gladiator whose rebellion transformed him from a man into an everlasting legend of resistance. The cultural fascination with these warriors was a complex and deeply Roman phenomenon. To the modern mind, the gladiatorial games are often seen as simple brutality, but to the Romans, they were layered with profound social and religious significance. They originated as funeral rites, a blood offering to honor the spirits of the deceased. Over time, they evolved into the ultimate political tool, a way for emperors and aristocrats to display their power and generosity to the masses. The gladiator, therefore, existed in a strange space. He was infamous, socially scorned, and legally beneath contempt, yet he could also be adored by the public like a modern superstar. His life was a performance of mortality, a constant dance with death that served to remind every citizen of the virtues of courage and discipline in the face of oblivion. The crowd's roared approval, the thumbs up or thumbs down, was a direct engagement with this drama, making them complicit in the fate of these celebrated but doomed men. It was from this oppressive, surreal world that the greatest legend of all emerged. Spartacus was a Thracian auxiliary who had deserted from the Roman army, was recaptured, and enslaved to train as a gladiator in Capua. In 73 B.C., he led a breakout from his training school with around 70 fellow gladiators. What began as a desperate bid for freedom quickly ignited into the most feared slave rebellion in Roman history. His forces swelled to tens of thousands of escaped slaves, and for 2 years, this ragtag army humiliated the Roman legions sent to destroy them, marching up and down the Italian peninsula and bringing the economy of the region to its knees. Spartacus's genius was not just military, it was symbolic. He offered the ultimate reversal of the natural order. The enslaved, the property, the men who were meant to die for entertainment, were now the ones holding the sword, and the masters were terrified. His ultimate defeat at the hands of Marcus Licinius Crassus was inevitable given the overwhelming might of Rome, but it was his end that truly sealed his mythical status. He died on the battlefield, his body never identified, allowing the legend to flourish that he might have escaped. The rebellion was crushed with horrific brutality, with 6,000 captured rebels crucified along the Appian Way as a grisly warning. Yet this punishment failed to erase his name. Instead, it elevated him. In his death, Spartacus ceased to be a man and became an idea, the eternal embodiment of the oppressed rising up against insurmountable power. His story was kept alive, not by the Roman elite who wanted to forget him, but by the common people and the slaves for whom he became a secret symbol of hope. This belief that such powerful spirits could not be contained by death bled directly into Roman folklore. There were whispers that the most beloved or most vengeful gladiators did not rest quietly. The les et lemures, the spirits of the dead, were a fundamental part of Roman belief, and it was thought that those who died violently or unjustly were particularly restless. It's easy to imagine the superstitious fear that the ghost of a mighty gladiator, betrayed or cheated of victory, might haunt the tunnels beneath the arena or the villas of the corrupt editor who condemned him. The very sand of the arena, soaked in the blood of hundreds, was considered a place of immense spiritual power and potential haunting, where the cheers of the crowd seemed to echo forever, even after the last spectator had gone home. This enigmatic status has been powerfully perpetuated and reshaped by modern media. The 19th century saw Spartacus rediscovered as a hero by political movements, a symbol for class struggle and the fight for workers' rights. Stanley Kubrick's 1960 epic film, with its iconic "I'm Spartacus" scene, cemented his story in the global consciousness as a timeless parable of solidarity and sacrifice against tyranny. Similarly, shows like Spartacus, Blood and Sand, and films like Gladiator, while taking historical liberties, tap into the core appeal of these figures. They explore the interior world of the gladiator, not just the violence, but the psychology of men forced to perform their own deaths for the entertainment of others, and their struggle to reclaim their dignity and agency. They remind us that the arena was a stage where the most fundamental human dramas of life, death, honor and freedom were played out in the most extreme terms imaginable. The eternal gladiator endures because he represents the part of the human spirit that refuses to be broken, even when all hope is lost and the entire world is watching, waiting for you to fall. Emerging from the roar of the Roman crowds, we slip silently into the shadows of feudal Japan, a world of rigid samurai honor that ironically gave birth to its perfect opposite. Our 13th enigmatic myth takes us into the realm of the shinobi, the shadow warriors better known as ninja. Popular culture paints them as near-demonic figures, superhuman assassins who could walk on water, become invisible, and wield dark magic. But the truth behind the legend is far more fascinating, a story not of supernatural powers, but of utterly brilliant human ingenuity applied to the art of information and deception. The exaggerated legends of the ninja are a tapestry of incredible abilities, largely woven by their terrified enemies and later amplified by theater and film. They were said to possess Kyuji-kiri, the power to weave hand signs that could control the elements, hypnotize opponents, or even summon demons. Folktales describe them vanishing in a puff of smoke, walking on water using special shoes, or scaling impossible walls with a single bound. These stories served a crucial purpose for the samurai class who faced them. It was far less embarrassing for a proud, armored knight to claim he was defeated by a magical phantom than to admit he was outwitted by a clever peasant with some simple tools and a bag of tricks. This propaganda effectively dehumanized the ninja, turning them into supernatural scapegoats for any unexplained misfortune, much like the witch hunts of medieval Europe. Peeling back these layers of myth reveals the historical reality, which is in many ways even more impressive. The ninja were not a single, unified group, but rather a class of mercenary spies and saboteurs, most famously from the regions of Iga and Koga. In a society bound by the strict Bushido code, they were the ultimate pragmatists. Their philosophy, ninjutsu, wasn't about magic. It was a comprehensive system of espionage, survival, and psychological warfare. Their primary role was not assassination, though that was sometimes a tool, but intelligence gathering. They were the ears and eyes of feudal lords, masters of infiltration who would embed themselves in enemy castles for weeks, posing as servants, monks, or merchants to learn troop movements, castle layouts, and secret alliances. Their famed arsenal was a testament to breathtaking innovation, not sorcery. Their black outfit, the shinobi shozoku, was not a skin-tight suit but practical, dark, loose-fitting clothing that allowed them to blend into the darkness and move freely. Their tools, the ninjutsu weapons, were marvels of practical design. The makibishi, or caltrops, were iron spikes always thrown point up to slow pursuing guards. The shuko were iron claws worn on the hands for climbing rough surfaces and parrying blades. They used hollowed reeds as snorkels to breathe while hiding in moats and developed special ash-filled eggs metsubushi to throw at the feet of enemies, creating a blinding cloud for escape. Each tool solved a very real, very dangerous problem with elegant, simple efficiency. The ultimate expression of their art was not combat, but the psychological manipulation known as Kyojitsu Tenkan Ho, the principle of blending truth and fiction. A ninja's greatest weapon was the mind of his enemy. They were masters of misdirection and rumor mongering. They might poison a well not to kill an army, but to make them believe their water supply was cursed, destroying morale. They would start fires in multiple locations to create chaos and draw guards away from their true target. By understanding human psychology and exploiting superstition, they could achieve their objectives without ever drawing a blade, making their enemy's own fears their most effective ally. The transformation of these pragmatic spies into the supernatural icons we know today is largely a product of the peaceful Edo period. With major wars ended, the need for espionage faded, and the stories of the shinobi began to be romanticized in kabuki theater and woodblock prints. These fictionalized accounts leaned heavily into the mystical elements, cementing the popular image. In the 20th century, global pop culture, from James Bond films to Teenage Mutant Turtle comics, took this image and ran with it, creating the timeless, black-clad superhero of stealth we recognize instantly. This enduring myth endures because it speaks to a universal fantasy, the power of the underdog. The ninja, often of lower social class, could defeat the highest-ranking samurai not through brute strength, but through superior intellect, preparation, and a willingness to do what the honorable warrior would not. They represent the ultimate triumph of cleverness over power, of the mind over the sword, ensuring their legacy as the most enigmatic and adaptable warriors in history. From the shadowy arts of the Japanese shinobi, we now travel to the sun-bleached plains of southern Africa, where a different kind of warrior myth was forged not in secrecy, but in the terrifying, open brilliance of military revolution. Our 14th enigmatic legend is that of the warrior king, Shaka Zulu. He was the brilliant, brutal, and seemingly unstoppable force who transformed a small clan into a nation that could challenge an empire, and his life story is so intertwined with superhuman achievement that the man and the myth have become inseparable. The historical rise of Shaka is the stuff of epic drama. Born around 1787, he was the illegitimate son of a Zulu chief and was exiled from his clan as a youth, growing up among the Mthethwa people. This period of hardship was his crucible. It was here that he honed his body and mind, and more importantly, began to radically reimagine the very nature of warfare. At the time, combat between Bantu groups was often a somewhat ritualized affair, with opponents hurling spears from a distance. Shaka saw this as inefficient and weak. When he eventually seized leadership of the Zulu, he instituted a total overhaul. He introduced the iconic Ikulwa, a short, heavy stabbing spear with a massive blade. Unlike the throwing spear, the Ikulwa was designed for close quarters, brutal efficiency. Its name is said to come from the sucking sound it made when pulled from a victim's body. He also replaced large ox-hide shields with smaller, more maneuverable ones, and drilled his men in a revolutionary new battle formation, the infamous bull horn. This tactic involved a central chest unit to engage the enemy, while two horns would flank and encircle them, and a loins reserve would be held back to finish the fight. This system required impeccable discipline and coordination, turning a militia into a professional standing army. His success was so swift and total that it seemed to defy mere human explanation, and so the myths began to bloom around him. One enduring legend speaks of a supernatural birth, suggesting he was not the son of a man but conceived by an imbulu, a lightning bird, a sign of divine favor and terrifying power. Other stories claimed he possessed impossible endurance, able to run 50 miles without rest or see the outcome of a battle before it even began. His body was said to be invulnerable to certain types of magic, and his will was so absolute that it could command the weather itself. These stories were not just fanciful tales, they were a necessary narrative for the people he conquered and the armies he led. How else could one explain the sudden, shocking ascent of the Zulu nation unless its leader was touched by the gods themselves? This supernatural aura was a powerful psychological weapon, intimidating his enemies and cementing the fanatical loyalty of his warriors. Yet, for all his genius, Shaka's reign was also defined by a profound and escalating ruthlessness. Following the death of his mother, Nandi, he plunged into a deep state of mourning that manifested in terrifying edicts. He ordered a year of prescribed grief where crops could not be planted, milk, a staple food, could not be consumed, and any woman found pregnant was executed along with her husband. These acts, which threatened the very survival of his people, revealed a darker side to his absolute power. His constant military campaigns, while expanding the empire, also created a vast ring of displaced and vengeful tribes, destabilizing the entire region. This volatility ultimately led to his downfall when he was assassinated by his half-brothers in 1828. His death underscores a recurring theme in these warrior myths: that the very traits of brilliance and unstoppable will that create an empire often contain the seeds of its eventual destruction. The impact of Shoka's legacy on global perceptions of African warrior culture is immense and complex. For a long time, European colonial narratives dismissed African military achievements, but the undeniable facts of the Zulu rise forced a reckoning. During the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, the disciplined Zulu impis handed the British Empire one of its most stunning defeats at the Battle of Isandlwana, proving that Shoka's system could still challenge a modern industrial army decades after his death. This event shocked the world and forever cemented the Zulu warrior as an icon of martial prowess and courage. In modern times, Shoka is a figure of powerful symbolism. In South Africa, he is a foundational national hero, a symbol of pre-colonial unity and resistance whose image adorns everything from currency to public monuments. He represents African innovation and agency, a powerful counterpoint to narratives of colonial supremacy. Yet this legacy is not without its controversy. The same military system that forged a nation also brought widespread death and displacement to countless other groups. Historians continue to debate the Mfecane, or crushing, a period of widespread chaos and migration that Shoka's wars are often cited as causing. Some argue this narrative was exaggerated by colonial settlers to justify their own land seizures, while others acknowledge the very real upheaval his conquests created. This duality makes Shoka the ultimate enigmatic warrior king. He is both a nation builder and a destroyer, a brilliant innovator and a tyrant. His myth endures because he embodies the immense, terrifying power of concentrated human will. He was a man who looked at the world of warfare, decided it was wrong, and changed it forever, leaving behind a legacy that is both celebrated and contested, but never ever ignored. Ascending now from the earthly conquests of a Zulu king, we turn our gaze upward to the very heavens, to a realm where mortal deeds are rewarded with divine immortality. Our 15th enigmatic myth lies not in the shadows of history, but in the brilliant light of devotion in the stories of China's celestial warriors. These are figures who transcended their human lives to become eternal gods, their legends woven into the fabric of spirituality, art, and national identity. And no figure embodies this ascent more completely than Guan Yu, the general who became a god. The historical Guan Yu was a formidable general during the turbulent Three Kingdoms period in the 3rd century, a loyal friend and fierce warrior serving under the warlord Liu Bei. His exploits are chronicled in the epic historical novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which blended fact with folklore to create an archetype of unshakable loyalty, righteousness, and martial prowess. He was known for his immense strength, his signature weapon a Guan Dao polearm called the Green Dragon Crescent Blade, and his iconic long, flowing beard. But it was not merely his battlefield successes that sparked his deification. It was the powerful virtues he was believed to represent, his unwavering loyalty to his oath of brotherhood, even in the face of certain death, and his stern, uncompromising sense of honor made him the ultimate Confucian gentleman warrior. After he was captured and executed by his enemies, his legend began to grow, transforming from a story about a man into a testament to an ideal. This process of deification was a gradual, centuries-long phenomenon, a fusion of Taoist, Buddhist, and folk religious beliefs. People began to report sightings of his spirit, believing that a man of such powerful virtue could not simply cease to exist. Taoist priests declared him a guardian deity, capable of quelling demonic forces. In Buddhism, he was adopted as a protector of the faith, known as Sangharama Bodhisattva. By the Song dynasty, emperors themselves were bestowing official titles upon him, and by the Ming dynasty, he was formally canonized as Guan Gong, Lord Guan, and later as Guan Dai, the god of war. This was unprecedented, a historical figure elevated to the highest pantheon of Chinese gods, not for magical deeds, but for the sheer power of his moral character. His divine portfolio expanded far beyond the battlefield. While he is venerated as a god of war, his influence is profoundly broader. He is also the god of loyalty, righteousness, and perhaps most surprisingly, of wealth and business. This connection stems from his legendary honesty. Merchants began to worship him, believing he would bless honest deals and protect them from deceit and betrayal. You will find his statue in police stations for his righteousness, in martial arts schools for his prowess, and in countless homes and businesses across Asia and the global diaspora. His image is unmistakable, a red-faced figure with a stern expression, often reading a book of Confucian classics with his trusted Guan Dao at his side. The red face symbolizes loyalty and courage, a trait said to have come from his ability to hide his blushing anger when faced with injustice. The belief in his divine intervention in human affairs is a cornerstone of his worship. There are countless tales, both ancient and modern, of his apparitions. Soldiers in countless wars have prayed to him for protection and claim to have seen a mighty, red-faced general leading a phantom army to their aid. During the Japanese invasion of China in the 1930s, stories circulated among troops of a mysterious fog that would conceal their movements, attributed to Guan Yu's intervention. Beyond the military, people pray to him for success in exams, for justice in legal matters, and for protection from harm. This is not a distant, abstract god. He is an active, engaged celestial guardian who responds to the pleas of the righteous. His myth is kept vibrantly alive through powerful cultural channels. In Chinese opera, his role is so sacred that the actor portraying him must undergo ritual purification and never ad-lib his lines, for he is considered a vessel for the god's presence during the performance. His stories are depicted in stunning temple art, detailed woodblock prints, and of course, in countless films, television series, and video games. This constant reinvention for new media ensures that each generation encounters Guan Yu not as a dusty historical relic, but as a living, powerful symbol. The enduring influence of Guan Yu and other celestial warriors like him reveals a profound cultural truth. In the Chinese spiritual worldview, the boundary between the human and the divine is permeable. A person can, through the sheer force of their virtue and their deeds, ascend to become a god. Guan Yu is the ultimate example of this. He is not worshipped because he was perfect, but because he strived to be perfectly virtuous in an imperfect world. He represents the belief that the highest human qualities, loyalty, honor, courage, and justice, are so powerful they can achieve immortality, becoming a permanent force for good in the universe. He is more than a myth. He is a moral compass, a divine protector, and an everlasting promise that righteousness, in the end, will always be recognized and exalted. Leaving behind the celestial guardians of Chinese myth, we plunge into the frigid, storm-tossed world of the Norse, where honor was forged in battle and glory was measured by a welcome to the god's own hall. Our 16th enigmatic myth is that of the Einherjar, the Eternal Vikings chosen for a singular, glorious, and endless purpose. This was the ultimate Viking aspiration, to be selected by the divine Valkyries from the chaos of the battlefield and taken to Valhalla, the great hall of the god Odin, there to prepare for the final, apocalyptic battle of Ragnarok. The promise of Valhalla was a powerful, intoxicating vision that fundamentally shaped the Viking mindset and their approach to warfare. In this myth, death was not an end but a potential promotion. The poems of the poetic Edda, like Grimnismal, describe Valhalla in lavish detail. A hall with 540 doors, wide enough for 800 warriors to march through side by side, its roof made of shields and its rafters of spears. Here, the Einherjar, which translates to those who fight alone or the once fighters, would engage in a daily ritual of supreme violence and camaraderie. Each day, they would arm themselves and march onto the fields outside the hall to fight each other to the death. And each evening, their wounds would be miraculously healed, the slain would rise again, and they would all feast together on the meat of the ever-replenishing boar Sihrimnir and drink endless mead from the udder of the goat Hythran. This cycle of daily battle and nightly feasting was not a pointless loop. It was a divine training regimen. These elite dead were being honed into the perfect army, their skills kept razor-sharp for the day they would be called upon to stand alongside Odin and the Aesir gods against the giants and monsters during the world's end. This belief was a masterstroke of motivational psychology. For a Viking warrior, the fear of death was mitigated by the glorious possibility of what came after. To die of old age or sickness in bed was a fate to be dreaded, a one-way ticket to the bleak and misty realm of hell. But to fall bravely with a sword in hand was to open the door to eternal honor and a place at the god's own table. This ethos encouraged audacious courage and a seeming disregard for personal safety that made Viking warriors so formidable and terrifying to their enemies. They weren't just fighting for land or loot, they were fighting for a cosmic resume, each battle a job interview for the afterlife, with the Valkyries as the celestial recruiters. The role of the Valkyries is crucial to this myth. These were not the romanticized shield maidens of later opera. In the original Old Norse sources, they were often fearsome and sinister figures. The word Valkyrja means chooser of the slain, and they were depicted as ominous spirits of battle hovering over the conflict like ravens, their choices determining who lived, who died, and most importantly, who was worthy of Odin's hall. Archaeological evidence powerfully supports the cultural pervasiveness of this belief. Small amulets known as Valkyrie figurines have been found across the Viking world. These tiny, metallic representations show a woman, often with a ponytail or helmet, holding a sword and shield. They were likely worn as protective charms or symbols of divine favor, a physical connection to the supernatural forces that governed a warrior's fate. The famous tapestry reconstructions from the Oseberg ship burial also show processions of figures that scholars interpret as Valkyries or other female supernatural beings, emphasizing their importance in the Norse conception of death and destiny. The enduring power of this myth extends far beyond the Viking Age, deeply shaping our modern perception of Norse heroism. The idea of Valhalla has been adopted and adapted by everything from Romantic-era art and Wagnerian opera to modern heavy metal music and blockbuster films. It presents a very specific and compelling vision of the afterlife, one that is active, communal, and centered on a purpose greater than oneself. It is not a paradise of rest but of preparation. The Einherjar are not at peace, they are in a state of perpetual readiness, their eternal reward being the chance to prove their worth again and again. This resonates because it frames heroism not as a single moment, but as a continuous practice, a state of being. Ultimately, the myth of the Einherjar is so much more than a simple warrior's paradise. It is a profound meditation on finding meaning in the face of inevitable doom. The Vikings knew through their prophecy of Ragnarok that their gods were doomed to fall and the world was destined to end in fire and ice. Yet the response encoded in the myth is not despair but defiant, glorious action. The Einherjar train every day for a battle they know they cannot ultimately win, but they train anyway. They fight for a cause that is destined to be lost, but they fight with all their might. This transforms them from mere ghostly soldiers into one of history's most powerful symbols of courage and resilience. They represent the idea that true honor is found not in victory, but in the quality of the struggle itself, in the unwavering commitment to stand and fight for what is right, even when the outcome is certain defeat. They are the eternal testament to the Viking spirit, to live with bravery, to die with purpose, and to feast in the halls of the gods while awaiting the final, glorious dusk. 17 myths into our journey, we now arrive at a story so deeply etched into the heart of Japan that it transcends history to become a national parable. This is the tale of the 47 Ronin, a story of loyalty so absolute it demanded the ultimate sacrifice. and a legend so powerful it birthed the myth of the phantom samurai, eternal spirits of vengeance and honor. Our story begins not in shadowy myth, but in the very bright, very political world of the 18th century Tokugawa shogunate. In 1701, a young lord named Asano Naganori was assigned to receive envoys from the imperial court, a duty that required tutoring in courtly etiquette. His instructor was the master of protocol, a powerful official named Kira Yoshinoka. Historical accounts suggest Kira was arrogant, corrupt, and known for expecting lavish gifts for his services. The proud and principled Asano either refused or failed to provide a sufficient bribe, and Kira responded with a relentless campaign of public insults and humiliation. The final straw was drawn when Kira called Asano a country bumpkin with no manners. In a flash of rage, right within the corridors of the shogun's own palace, a place where drawing a blade was a capital offense, Asano drew his short sword and attacked Kira, wounding him in the forehead. For this breach of absolute peace, the shogun commanded Asano to commit seppuku, or ritual suicide. His lands were confiscated, his family lineage dissolved, and his samurai were disbanded, cast out into the world as masterless ronin. This is where the historical event ends and the legend truly begins. Led by Asano's chief retainer, a man named Oishi Yoshio, 47 of these now disenfranchised samurai made a secret blood oath. Their goal was not to protest the shogun's judgment, which they accepted as law, but to fulfill the deeper, unwritten code of Bushido, to avenge their lord's dishonor by killing the man who provoked him. They knew this mission was a one-way path. To succeed would mean their own certain execution for murder. They embraced this fate. To lull Kira and his spies into a false sense of security, the ronin scattered. Oishi himself became the subject of public scorn, seemingly abandoning his honor to drown his sorrows in drink and debauchery in Kyoto. He divorced his wife and frequented brothels, all while secretly planning the attack with meticulous precision. For nearly 2 years they lived in the shadows, their resolve hardening while the world believed they had forgotten their lord. Then, on a snowy night in December 1703, they struck. In a perfectly coordinated assault, the 47 ronin stormed Kira's heavily fortified mansion in Edo. They fought not to massacre, but to find their specific target. They located Kira cowering in an outhouse, and Oishi offered him the very honor in death that he had denied their lord, the chance to die by his own hand in seppuku. When Kira was too terrified to comply, Oishi beheaded him with the same dagger Asano had used to take his own life. The ronin then marched across town to the temple of Sengakuji, where they washed Kira's severed head and presented it at their lord Asano's grave. Their mission of vengeance was complete. Now came the part that would cement their legend for all time. They had obeyed the code of the warrior by avenging their lord, but in doing so, they had broken the shogun's law. They did not flee, they surrendered and awaited their fate. After weeks of intense debate among a populace that saw them as heroes, the shogun ruled that they too must die by their own hand. But in a crucial distinction, he allowed them the honorable death of seppuku, a silent acknowledgement that while their actions were legally criminal, their motives were morally righteous. On the 4th of February 1703, the 46 surviving ronin, one had been pardoned for being too young, kept their final appointment with destiny. They died with the same quiet dignity they had lived with for 2 long years, and were buried side by side before their master's grave at Sengakuji. Their graves remain a place of pilgrimage to this day, where people burn incense in honor of their loyalty. This powerful true story was quickly adapted into kabuki and bunraku puppet plays, most famously Chushingura, or the treasury of loyal retainers. It was here that the history was polished into myth. The playwrights, needing to avoid censorship for criticizing the shogunate, changed the names and dates and amplified the drama. They emphasized the ronin's patient suffering and their unwavering focus, turning them into flawless archetypes of Bushido virtue. This artistic retelling is what truly embedded the story into the Japanese consciousness, transforming 47 men into a single, timeless symbol of loyalty that perseveres even beyond death. And from this symbolic death springs the final, haunting layer of the myth, the belief that they never truly rested. It is said their spirits, their yurei, could not find peace, forever bound to the earthly plane by the intensity of their mission and their sacrifice. Ghost stories began to circulate. Travelers on the road to Sengakuji would report seeing a procession of silent, stoic samurai, their heads bowed not in shame but in solemn duty. Others tell of 47 ghostly lights seen floating near the temple gates. These are not malevolent spirits but eternal guardians, their vengeance complete but their loyalty so profound it echoes through the centuries. They are the phantom samurai, a permanent reminder that some promises are so sacred they are not even broken by the grave. Their legend endures because it presents the ultimate conflict between human law and a higher moral duty, and offers a breathtaking answer. That true honor lies in accepting the consequences of both. From the ghostly loyalty of Japan's phantom samurai, we now travel to the very heart of Western Christendom, to a small city-state guarded by a force whose dedication is as vibrant as their uniforms. Our 18th enigmatic myth is that of the immortal mercenaries, the Swiss Guard. They appear as a living anachronism, a Renaissance painting sprung to life, standing watch over the Vatican with an unwavering stoicism that suggests they are less a military unit and more an eternal, unwavering force woven into the very fabric of the Holy See itself. The origins of this legendary force are rooted in a time when Swiss soldiers were considered the most formidable mercenaries in all of Europe. Their reputation for fierce loyalty, discipline, and brutal efficiency on the battlefield was unparalleled. In 1506, Pope Julius II, a man known for his political savvy and appreciation of military power, formally invited these elite fighters into his service. This was not a ceremonial appointment, it was a strategic hiring. The Pope needed a personal guard he could absolutely trust in the treacherous political landscape of Renaissance Italy, and the Swiss, with their famed integrity and distance from local Roman factions, were the perfect choice. They were the special forces of their day, and their primary duty was the very real, very dangerous task of protecting the person of the pontiff from assassination, kidnap, and the constant threat of political upheaval. This role was put to the ultimate test just 21 years later in an event that cemented their legend forever, the sack of Rome in 1527. The army of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, a massive force of mutinous and unpaid Lutheran landsknechts, descended upon the city. What followed was not a battle but a horrific orgy of violence, looting, and desecration. As chaos consumed Rome, the Vatican became the final refuge. The Swiss Guard, vastly outnumbered and facing certain death, made their legendary last stand. Under the command of their captain, Caspar Rurist, they fought a desperate rearguard action on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. Their mission was not to win, but to buy enough time for Pope Clement VII to escape through a secret elevated passageway, the Passetto di Borgo, to the relative safety of Castel Sant'Angelo. Of the 189 guards, only 42 survived the carnage, but their sacrifice was complete. They had fulfilled their oath to the letter, protecting the Pope with their lives and creating a story of valor that would echo through the centuries. This act of sacrifice is the crucible in which their modern myth was forged. It transformed them in the eyes of the world from highly skilled mercenaries into something far greater, sacred guardians, a spiritual bulwark whose commitment transcended politics and payment. The belief that they are an immortal force stems from this unbroken line of duty. While individual guardsmen serve for a period of years, the institution itself has endured for over 5 centuries, a continuous, living thread connecting the modern world to the age of Michelangelo and Raphael. Their presence suggests that some ideals of fidelity, service, sacrifice are permanent, unchanging constants in a world of flux. Perhaps the most visible symbol of this timelessness is their iconic uniform, which is so often mistaken for a purely Renaissance costume. While the striking blue, red, and yellow stripes are indeed Medici colors, the uniform was actually designed in the early 20th century. Yet, this fact does little to diminish its power. The uniform is a masterful piece of symbolic theater. It instantly communicates tradition, pageantry, and an unbroken connection to the past. It makes the guardsmen appear not as modern soldiers, but as figures from a timeless tapestry, eternal sentinels whose duty is to a higher authority than any temporal power. It's a visual myth that reinforces their role as the living, breathing guardians of tradition. Beneath the brilliant plumage, however, lies the reality of a highly capable modern security force. New recruits are all serving members of the Swiss military, ensuring they arrive with elite training and discipline. Their preparation includes extensive combat training, advanced security protocols, and mastery of modern weaponry discreetly integrated with their ceremonial pikes and halberds. They are experts in crowd control and emergency response, protecting one of the most visited and vulnerable targets in the world. The myth of the stoic, motionless guard is just that, a public face. Behind the scenes, they are a sophisticated security detail, their unwavering dedication now complemented by state-of-the-art technology and relentless training. The true heart of their myth, however, is found in their oath. Each new guardsman swears allegiance not to a country, but to the person of the Pope, promising to defend him with their own life if necessary. This oath is taken in a solemn ceremony on the 6th of May, the anniversary of the sack of Rome, directly linking each new recruit to the sacrifice of their brothers from 500 years ago. It is a powerful, physical act of remembrance and renewal, a promise that the line will not be broken. They are not immortal in body, but the institution they serve and the ideal of absolute fidelity they represent truly is. In a world of shifting allegiances, the Swiss Guard stands as a permanent testament to the power of a promise kept, a vivid, living myth in striped breeches and polished steel, reminding us that some duties are truly eternal. Leaving behind the ancient halls of the Vatican, we now cross an ocean to a land where the spiritual and the martial were not separate paths, but one and the same. Our 19th enigmatic myth takes us onto the sweeping Great Plains and into the deep canyons of the American Southwest, to the stories of the warrior prophets. These were not mere fighters, they were visionaries, men who were believed to commune with the spirit world to gain protection and power, guiding their people through some of the most devastating conflicts in history. At the heart of this legend stands the iconic figure of Crazy Horse, a Lakota leader whose very name evokes a sense of mystical defiance. The historical context for these figures is one of profound upheaval and resistance. Throughout the 19th century, Native American tribes faced the relentless tide of American expansion, a force that brought war, broken treaties, and the catastrophic destruction of their traditional ways of life. In this existential struggle, leadership required more than just tactical brilliance. It demanded a deep spiritual fortitude. The warrior prophet emerged from this need, a leader whose authority was derived not from political appointment, but from a perceived direct connection to the divine. This spiritual authority was what made a leader like Crazy Horse so compelling to his people and so terrifying to his enemies. He wasn't just another skilled horseman. He was a man touched by the sacred, a living vessel for the will of the spirits fighting to preserve a world. The myths surrounding Crazy Horse's invulnerability are some of the most powerful in American lore. It was widely believed among the Lakota that he possessed a sacred power that made him impervious to bullets. This belief didn't spring from nowhere. It was rooted in his own spiritual practices and the many close calls he survived on the battlefield. The story goes that as a young man, he went on a vision quest, and it was during this rite of passage that he received his power. His father, a medicine man himself, later interpreted the vision, telling him that he would never be killed by a bullet, but that his end would come by being held, a prophecy that would later feel chillingly accurate. In battles like the famous victory at the Little Bighorn, witnesses reported seeing him ride fearlessly directly into enemy fire, his body seemingly untouched as bullets whipped around him. He would often tie a small stone behind his ear and dust his horse with dirt from a gopher hole, part of a sacred ritual to ensure protection. For his followers, this wasn't superstition, it was observable fact. His survival against impossible odds was proof of his blessed status, a tangible sign that the spirits were fighting alongside them. But Crazy Horse was far from alone in this archetype. Among the Apache, another legendary figure emerged with a similar aura of supernatural defiance, Geronimo. His power also came from a divine source, a vision granted by the spirit Usan. Following a brutal attack by Mexican soldiers that killed his mother, wife, and children, a grieving Geronimo was said to have heard a voice call his name 4 times, promising that no bullet would ever kill him. This vision transformed him. He became a relentless and seemingly unstoppable force, leading raids across the Southwest with a reputation for disappearing into thin air and evading capture against all odds. His followers truly believed that he could see into the future, predicting the movements of his enemies and even the weather. These shared traits across different cultures point to a universal pattern. In times of extreme crisis, when conventional power has failed, people look for a leader who transcends the merely human, one who carries the assurance of a higher power. The role of these prophets extended far beyond the battlefield. They were the spiritual anchors of their communities. In Lakota society, a Wakasawakan, or holy man, was a conduit between the people and the spirit world. When a military leader also held this spiritual role, his influence was immense. Crazy Horse's guidance was sought for everything from hunting to healing. His visions weren't just about winning fights, they were about maintaining the spiritual balance of his people, ensuring their connection to the land and their traditions remained unbroken even as the world around them collapsed. He fought not for conquest but for preservation, to protect the sacred Black Hills and the nomadic way of life that defined his culture. His war was a holy war. The preservation of these stories is a testament to the resilience of oral tradition. Unlike the written histories of their opponents, the legacies of Crazy Horse and Geronimo were not recorded in official documents. They were kept alive through storytelling, passed down from generation to generation around campfires and in family lodges. Elders would recount the deeds and the visions, ensuring that the lessons, the values, and the very spirit of these leaders were not lost. This oral history is not a fixed, sterile record. It is a living, breathing narrative that evolves with each telling, constantly reaffirming the cultural identity and historical memory of the people. It is how a man like Crazy Horse, who famously avoided having his photograph taken, remains so vividly alive in the minds of his descendants today. The enduring legacy of the warrior prophet is complex and deeply poignant. For native communities, these figures are eternal symbols of resistance and cultural survival. They represent a time when their people fought back with immense courage, guided by a faith that was intimately tied to the land itself. For the wider world, their myths challenge the simplistic narrative of the Indian Wars. They force us to see these conflicts not just as military engagements, but as spiritual clashes between 2 entirely different worldviews. The belief in a bulletproof warrior was not a primitive delusion. It was an act of profound faith, a declaration that their cause was so righteous that the universe itself would intervene to protect it. The ultimate tragedy, and the thing that makes their stories so haunting, is that this faith was, in the end, not enough to stop the advance of history. Yet the fact that we still tell their stories, that the myth of their invincibility persists, is its own form of victory. They were never truly bulletproof, but their legends have proven to be armor-piercing, breaking through the hardened shell of history to remind us of the incredible power of the human spirit when it fights for its home, its faith, and its very existence. Crossing from the windswept plains of North America, we now arrive in the sun-scorched heart of medieval Spain, a land fractured by faith and defined by a centuries-long struggle for its very soul. Here, amidst the clash of Christian and Moorish kingdoms, a legend was forged that would become the bedrock of Spanish identity. Our 20th enigmatic myth is that of El Cid, the eternal champion of chivalry, a warrior whose unwavering spirit was said to be so powerful that not even death could end his campaign. The historical Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar was a complex and formidable figure, a nobleman from the town of Vivar near Burgos. Living in the 11th century, he was a master military tactician whose prowess earned him the title El Cid from the Arabic as Cid, meaning the Lord. His story, however, is not one of simple religious crusade. The political landscape of Reconquista Spain was a tangled web of shifting alliances. El Cid famously fought for both Christian and Muslim rulers, serving as a mercenary captain for the Moorish king of Zaragoza after being exiled by his own Christian king, Alfonso VI of Castile. This pragmatism paints a picture of a man loyal less to a single faith or crown than to his own personal honor and the men who followed him. His greatest achievement was the independent conquest of the wealthy Mediterranean city of Valencia, which he ruled as his own principality until his death in 1099. He was a brilliant, ambitious, and often controversial lord, a man who navigated the gray areas of a fractured world with a sharp sword and a sharper mind. It is from this complicated history that the pristine myth of El Cid was born, largely through the epic poem Canto de Mio Cid, the Song of My Cid, composed about a century after his death. This work performs a breathtaking act of political and spiritual alchemy, transforming the pragmatic, sometimes rebellious mercenary into the perfect embodiment of Castilian Christian virtue. The poem downplays his service to Muslim lords and amplifies his loyalty to the often ungrateful King Alfonso. Its central narrative arc is his quest to regain his honor after an unjust exile, a theme that resonated deeply in a feudal society built on loyalty and reputation. The Cantor is not a biography, it is a foundation myth, carefully crafted to create a national hero for a Spain that was still in the process of defining itself. It codifies the ideals of the Reconquista piety, bravery, and unwavering loyalty to the cause of reclaiming Spain for Christendom, and projects them perfectly onto the figure of Rodrigo Diaz. This brings us to the most stunning and enduring of the El Cid legends, the story of his posthumous victory. According to the tale, as the Almoravid Moors laid siege to Valencia after his death, his wife, Jimena, was faced with a desperate situation. To prevent the army's morale from collapsing, she devised a macabre and brilliant stratagem. She ordered that the Campeador's body be carefully embalmed. Then, clad in full armor, he was strapped upright onto his warhorse Babieca. With his sword, Tizona, gripped in his lifeless hand, the preserved corpse of El Cid was led out through the gates of Valencia at the head of his army. The sight of their seemingly invincible lord still leading them even in death so terrified the besieging Moorish forces that they broke and fled in a panic, securing a final, miraculous victory for the Christians. This incredible story is the ultimate expression of the myth-making power surrounding El Cid. On a symbolic level, it transforms him from a man into a perpetual force of nature. He becomes the literal spirit of the Reconquista, an undying will that continues to drive the Christian cause forward long after his mortal life has ended. It speaks to a deep human desire for legacy, the hope that a great leader's influence and power can somehow transcend death itself to protect their people in a moment of ultimate crisis. The image is both chilling and profoundly inspiring, a perfect metaphor for how national heroes function. Their ideas and their example outlive their physical forms, continuing to guide and inspire a nation. The process of his transformation into a national symbol was a slow burn across the centuries. During the Spanish Golden Age, playwrights like Guillén de Castro further romanticized his story. But it was during the 19th and 20th centuries, periods of intense national upheaval and the search for a unified Spanish identity, that El Cid was fully weaponized as a nationalist icon. The dictatorship of Francisco Franco heavily promoted the myth of El Cid as the perfect Catholic crusader, a symbol of a unified, militant, and purely Christian Spain. This political co-opting simplified his complex history into a blunt instrument of propaganda, overshadowing the more nuanced historical man with the idealized legend. Yet, despite this, the figure of El Cid retains a powerful, multifaceted appeal. He is the ultimate underdog who, through sheer force of character and martial skill, rises from exile to become a kingmaker and a ruler in his own right. He is the man of honor wronged by his sovereign, who nevertheless remains loyal to the higher ideal of kingship, and he is the eternal guardian whose very corpse defends the homeland. He represents the unwavering Spanish spirit, the casta, a term implying a mix of noble lineage, courage, and sheer stubbornness. The legend of his final ride is not just a fanciful tale, it is a profound cultural statement about resilience. It asserts that the spirit of Spain, like its greatest hero, cannot be killed. It may be beaten, betrayed, or seemingly defeated, but it will always be strapped back into the saddle, ready to charge one more time, forever defending the idea of the nation itself. From the sun-baked plains of Spain and its eternal champion, we now journey to a much more recent, yet no less haunting, conflict, the American Civil War. A war that tore a nation apart also gave birth to legends of its own, and few are as enduring as our 21st enigmatic myth, that of Stonewall Jackson's ghost army, his famed foot cavalry. This is the story of a commander so brilliant and his men so seemingly inexhaustible that their reputation took on a supernatural life of its own, creating tales that they were guided by an otherworldly force and that their leader's spirit never truly left the battlefield. The legend of Jackson's foot cavalry is rooted in a series of almost unbelievable military maneuvers during the early years of the war. In the spring of 1862, in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, Jackson commanded a force of about 17,000 men. Facing three separate Union armies totaling over 60,000 soldiers, his situation appeared hopeless. Yet, through a combination of forced marches that defied human endurance, impeccable use of the valley's geography, and sheer audacity, Jackson achieved the impossible. He marched his men over 600 miles in just 48 days, striking one Union force, then miraculously appearing miles away to strike another before the first could even regroup. They moved with such shocking speed and appeared in such unexpected places that bewildered Union generals began to suspect Jackson had 100,000 men, or that he possessed the ability to teleport his entire army. His infantrymen, who accomplished these feats on foot with minimal supplies, earned their legendary nickname not for riding horses but for moving with the speed of cavalry. It was from these staggering realities that the myths of supernatural aid began to flourish. Exhausted Union soldiers and frustrated commanders, unable to comprehend how a force could move so fast over such difficult terrain, began to whisper of darker forces at work. Some said Jackson's men did not need to sleep, that they were fueled by a fanatical spirit that made them immune to fatigue. Others suggested that Jackson himself was in league with the devil, or that he was a modern-day Joshua, commanding the sun to stand still to grant his army more hours to march. The most pervasive myth was that Jackson knew every deer path and mountain trail in the Shenandoah Valley because he was guided by a mysterious, ethereal light, a kind of divine or demonic will, the wisp that led him and his troops unerringly through the darkness. These stories were a form of psychological warfare in themselves. The mere idea of Jackson's approach could incite panic, as his enemies felt they were not fighting a man, but an unstoppable, almost spectral force. The historical truth, while less supernatural, is no less impressive. The reality was a brutal regimen of discipline and sacrifice. Jackson's marches were not magic. They were a nightmare of blistered feet, empty stomachs, and sheer willpower. He was a strict disciplinarian who tolerated no straggling. He often moved his army at night to conceal his movements and achieve complete surprise. His deep knowledge of the Shenandoah Valley wasn't mystical. It was the result of meticulous study and the use of local guides. His success was a masterpiece of logistics, deception, and an intimate understanding of what motivated his men. They believed in him utterly, and that belief gave them the strength to push their bodies beyond normal limits. The myth of the Ghost Army was born from the inability of his opponents to accept that they had been outthought and outmarched by a master tactician and his supremely motivated men. The tragic end of Stonewall Jackson only served to magnify his legend into the realm of the eternal. At the height of his success during the Battle of Chancellorsville in May 1863, he was accidentally shot by his own Confederate pickets while returning from a reconnaissance mission. His left arm was amputated and he succumbed to pneumonia 8 days later. His last words, "Let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees," were instantly mythologized, seen as a spiritual crossing into a peaceful afterlife. For the South, reeling from this catastrophic loss, the idea that such an indispensable leader could be gone was unthinkable, and so the stories began almost immediately. Soldiers from the Army of Northern Virginia, particularly after Jackson's death, would swear in later battles that they had seen his ghost on his familiar Little Sorrel horse, Little Sorrel, leading a charge or directing troops at a crucial moment. These spectral sightings were reported at Gettysburg during the Wilderness Campaign and beyond. It was a powerful form of wish fulfillment, a desperate, collective need for their fallen hero to return in their darkest hour. The legacy of Stonewall Jackson and his foot cavalry is a complex tapestry woven from brilliant reality and powerful myth. For the Confederacy, he became the ultimate lost cause icon, a symbol of what might have been had fate not intervened. His military genius is still studied in war colleges around the world, a testament to the real-world impact of his strategies. But the enduring power of his story lies in that enigmatic blend of fact and folklore. He represents the idea that a leader's influence can be so profound that it transcends death itself, that the spirit of determination and resolve can become a tangible force on the battlefield. The ghost of Stonewall Jackson is more than just a campfire story. It is a testament to the profound psychological impact of leadership and the enduring human need to believe that our greatest heroes are never truly gone, that they are always just across the river, waiting for the moment to ride back and lead us one more time. Emerging from the smoke and chaos of America's Civil War, we now travel back through centuries to the very heart of the Roman Republic, to the legend of a man who became more than a slave, more than a gladiator, but an eternal specter of defiance. Our 22nd enigmatic myth is that of the undying gladiator, Spartacus. His story is the ultimate underdog narrative, but it is his enduring, almost supernatural presence in the cultural imagination that truly captivates. This is the myth of a rebel whose spirit was said to be so potent that it could never be extinguished, a ghost of liberation that continues to whisper to the oppressed. The historical revolt was a seismic event that shook the Roman Republic to its core. In 73 BC, Spartacus, a Thracian auxiliary turned deserter, then enslaved gladiator, engineered a breakout from a training school in Capua. What began with 70 men seizing kitchen utensils and wagon poles quickly exploded into a full-scale war. His genius lay in his ability to unite. He wasn't just leading fellow gladiators, he was rallying a vast army of enslaved shepherds, farm workers, and miners, thousands of souls who had been brutally crushed by the Roman machine. For 2 years, this rebel force humiliated Rome, defeating legion after legion sent to crush them and marching the length of Italy. a living, breathing indictment of the Republic's foundational hypocrisy, which preached freedom while running on enslaved labor. The ultimate, chilling response from Rome reveals just how terrified the Republic was. The praetors and consuls had failed. Finally, the wealthy magnate Marcus Licinius Crassus was given command, and he pursued Spartacus with a terrifying brutality. When some of Spartacus's men broke away, Crassus revived the ancient and horrific punishment of decimation, having his own soldiers beat 1 out of every 10 men to death to enforce discipline. The final battle was a foregone conclusion against such overwhelming force. Spartacus died on the field, his body never recovered, a crucial detail that allowed the legend to flourish. In a final act of psychological terror, Crassus had 6,000 captured rebels crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road from Capua to Rome as a gruesome warning to any who would dare challenge the established order. This was meant to be the final word, a brutal period at the end of the sentence, but a spirit cannot be crucified. Almost immediately, the myth of the undying Spartacus was born. The fact that his body was never identified by the Romans led to immediate whispers. Perhaps he had escaped, perhaps he was not a man at all, but a force of nature that could not be killed. For the millions of enslaved people across the Republic, the story of his revolt became a secret, sacred folktale. They whispered of a liberator who would return, a messianic figure whose apparent defeat was merely a retreat, and who would one day rise again to shatter their chains. This belief was a powerful act of psychological resistance. The Romans could nail a body to a cross, but they could not nail down an idea. In every corner of the empire, the story of the gladiator who defied Rome was told and retold, each telling keeping the ember of hope alive, transforming a historical rebel into an eternal symbol of possibility. This myth was powerfully resurrected and reshaped in the modern era, most famously in Howard Fast's 1951 novel, written while he was imprisoned for contempt of Congress during the McCarthy era. For Fast, Spartacus was the perfect allegory for the individual standing against a modern, oppressive system. Stanley Kubrick's 1960 film adaptation, with its iconic moment where every enslaved man stands to declare, "I'm Spartacus," to protect their leader, cemented this idea in the global consciousness. This scene is historical fiction, but its power is mythological truth. It represents the ultimate triumph of the collective spirit, the idea that the cause of freedom is bigger than any single individual, and that once ignited, it can spread until everyone is Spartacus. The film transforms him from a skilled military leader into a Christ-like figure, a martyr for the cause of human dignity. The undying nature of his myth lies in its incredible adaptability. In the 18th and 19th centuries, his story was adopted by abolitionist movements as a potent symbol against the transatlantic slave trade. In the 20th century, he became an icon for leftist political movements, trade unions, and fighters for civil rights, representing the struggle of the oppressed against the powerful. Even his name was co-opted. The Spartacist League in Germany took its name from him in their post-World War I uprising. His image is endlessly reinvented, from the noble hero of film to a symbol in modern video games and television series, each iteration exploring a different facet of his rebellion. The strategic mind, the reluctant leader, the man yearning for home. Ultimately, Spartacus endures because he represents a fundamental human yearning, the belief that no oppression is absolute. The Romans won the battle, they ended the revolt, but they utterly lost the narrative war. The thousands of crosses on the Appian Way were meant to tell a story of Roman power. Instead, they tell a story of Roman fear. The myth of the undying gladiator assures us that the desire for freedom is an unstoppable force. It can be delayed, it can be battered, it can be seemingly crucified and left for dead, but it cannot be killed. Spartacus lives on not as a ghost who haunts a battlefield, but as an idea that haunts the powerful, a permanent reminder that even the mightiest empire rests on a foundation that can, at any moment, choose to stand up and say, "No more." Leaving behind the ghost of a Roman gladiator, we now travel to a place where the pursuit of physical perfection is inextricably linked to the quest for spiritual awakening. Our 23rd enigmatic myth takes us to the Songshan Mountains of China, to the ancient Shaolin temple and the legends of its warrior monks. These are not mere martial artists, they are figures of almost supernatural ability, said to harness an inner energy or kai, to perform feats that defy physics, from scaling sheer walls to withstanding brutal impact. Their myth suggests that through decades of devout meditation and rigorous training, a monk can achieve a state where the body and mind are not just connected, but utterly unified, becoming an instrument of both peace and unimaginable power. The history of the Shaolin Temple provides the fertile ground from which these incredible stories grew. Founded in the 5th century by an Indian Buddhist monk named Bachuo, the temple was established as a center for the quiet, contemplative practice of Chan Buddhism, known as Zen in Japan. The legend credits another Indian monk, Bodhidharma, with fundamentally transforming the monastery's destiny. Around the 6th century, he is said to have arrived at Shaolin and found the monks weak and unable to endure the long hours of seated meditation. In response, he introduced a series of exercises designed to strengthen both body and mind. These exercises, drawn from Indian martial arts and his own profound observations of animal movements, are considered the foundational roots of Shaolin Kung Fu. This was the revolutionary idea that physical discipline was not a distraction from spiritual growth, but a vital pathway to it. The body was a temple to be fortified, and the relentless practice of martial forms or katas became a moving meditation, a way to cultivate focus, discipline, and inner stillness amidst controlled violence. This philosophical fusion gave rise to the mythos of their supernatural capabilities. Stories abound of monks who could focus their kai to achieve the impossible. The legendary skill of the lightness technique allowed them to run across the surface of snow without leaving a trace or leap to incredible heights. Their iron body training enabled them to withstand powerful blows, even the thrust of a spear to the throat, by hardening their muscles and channeling internal energy to protect their vitals. Perhaps the most famous demonstration is the one-finger Zen, where a monk supports their entire body weight on a single finger. To an outside observer, these feats appear to be magic, a blatant defiance of the laws of nature. But the monks themselves would argue it is not magic at all, but the highest application of natural law, a perfect understanding of leverage, biomechanics, and breath control achieved through a lifetime of devout practice. The myth is a testament to the incredible and often unexplored potential of the human body when pushed by an indomitable will and a tranquil mind. The cultural impact of this legend is immeasurable, largely thanks to the global phenomenon of wushu cinema. Films from Hong Kong in the 1970s and 80s, starring icons like Bruce Lee and Jet Li, took the essence of Shaolin Kung Fu and amplified it into spectacular fantasy. While these films were fictional, they were rooted in a genuine admiration for the discipline and skill of the monks. They presented a vision of the warrior monk as a righteous defender of the weak, using his abilities only for justice. This portrayal captured the world's imagination, leading to a surge of interest in martial arts and a romanticized view of Shaolin as a place where any dedicated student could unlock superhuman abilities. The temple itself has navigated this modern fame, now welcoming tourists and students from across the globe, a living institution balancing its ancient spiritual heritage with its status as a global cultural icon. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Shaolin myth lies in its promise of holistic mastery. The warrior monk is the ultimate synthesis of seemingly opposite ideals. He is a pacifist trained in the art of combat, a destroyer who seeks enlightenment, a man of action who pursues perfect stillness. He represents the belief that the greatest battle is not against an external enemy, but against the limitations of our own selves. His legendary feats are not the point, They are merely the side effect of a life dedicated to perfecting the connection between the fist and the spirit, proving that true power is not found in violence, but in the profound, unshakable peace that makes violence unnecessary. From the serene mountains of Shaolin, where monks seek enlightenment through motion, we now travel west to the heart of a sprawling empire built on conquest and devotion. Our 24th enigmatic myth takes us into the elite core of the Ottoman military machine, the Janissaries. These were not ordinary soldiers, they were the Janissary, or new troops, a corps so shrouded in legend that they were believed to be supernaturally loyal and nearly invincible, their spirits still guarding the legacy of the empire they served. The origins of this formidable force are as startling as their reputation. The Janissary Corps was established in the late 14th century, born from a controversial and radical policy known as the Devshirme, or gathering. This was a form of human levy where Ottoman officials would periodically conscript young boys, typically between the ages of 8 and 18, from Christian communities within the empire, particularly in the Balkans. To the modern mind, this sounds like a horrific abduction, and it was undoubtedly traumatic for the families involved. Yet, within the context of the Ottoman state, it was seen as a sophisticated system for building a perfectly loyal administrative and military class. These boys were taken not for punishment but for potential. They were removed from their birth families and their native faith, converted to Islam, and thrust into a rigorous, all-encompassing system designed to strip away their old identities and forge them anew. Their only family would be the Ottoman state, their only father, the Sultan himself. This process of transformation is where the myth of their unshakable loyalty begins. The recruits were subjected to years of intense physical training, education in the Turkish language and Ottoman customs, and indoctrination into Sunni Islam. The most intellectually promising might be groomed for high administrative posts, even rising to become grand viziers. But the strongest were funneled into the Janissary Corps, where they lived in communal barracks under a strict monastic-like discipline. They were forbidden from marrying or engaging in trade, ensuring their energies were focused solely on their military duties and their allegiance to the Sultan. This total separation from ordinary society created a unique bond among them and an almost fanatical devotion to the state that had remade them. They were the ultimate embodiment of the Ottoman ideal, a human weapon with no past and no future, existing only to serve the present glory of the empire. On the battlefield, their reputation for invincibility was earned through a combination of discipline, innovation, and sheer terror. The Janissaries were among the first standing professional infantry armies in Europe since the Roman legions. While their European rivals often relied on feudal levies, poorly trained farmers summoned for a season, the Janissaries trained year-round. They were masters of early gunpowder weapons, particularly the musket and the hand cannon, and their adoption of these technologies was faster and more effective than that of their opponents. Their iconic headdress, the berk, with its long cloth tail that could be wrapped around the neck in battle, became a symbol feared across 3 continents. They were the shock troops of the Ottoman advance, the iron fist that shattered enemy lines at critical moments in legendary battles like the conquest of Constantinople and the victory at Mohacs. Their standard, featuring a soup kettle or kazan, symbolized their communal brotherhood, but to their enemies it signaled a coming storm of fire and steel. Yet, like all seemingly eternal institutions, the Janissaries' strength eventually became their greatest weakness. Over centuries, the Corps evolved from a merit-based military elite into a powerful, conservative political faction. The rules against marriage and business were relaxed, and sons of Janissaries began to inherit their fathers' positions, corrupting the Devshirme system that had ensured their quality. They grew wealthy and entrenched, often using their power to stage revolts and depose sultans who dared to challenge their privileges or modernize the army. They became the very antithesis of what they were created to be, a force resisting change and threatening the stability of the state they were meant to protect. By the early 19th century, they were a reactionary wall standing against the progress the empire desperately needed to survive. This led to their inevitable and violent end, an event known as the Auspicious Incident in 1826. Sultan Mahmud II, after secretly building a new, modern artillery corps loyal only to him, made his move. He raised the sacred standard of the Prophet and called upon the population and his new troops to exterminate the Janissaries who had barricaded themselves in their barracks. The resulting bombardment was merciless and absolute. Thousands of Janissaries were killed and the order was officially abolished. It was a brutal, definitive act of patricide where the state destroyed its own most famous creation. But can such a powerful spirit truly be eradicated by cannon fire? This is where the folklore begins. In the decades and centuries that followed, stories emerged among the people of Istanbul. Some spoke of ghostly figures seen marching in perfect formation through the misty streets of the old city, their spectral bulks visible for a moment before fading away. Others told of the sound of distant military music, the Matron Band, playing in the dead of night near the Topkapi Palace. These tales proposed that the Janissaries, in spirit, never truly accepted their dissolution. Their loyalty to the empire was so fundamental to their being that it transcended their own destruction. The legend says they remain eternal sentinels bound by their oath, forever standing a ghostly watch over the glory of an empire that no longer exists, a permanent, haunting reminder of a time when their name was synonymous with unstoppable power and unwavering devotion. Leaving behind the ghostly loyalty of the Ottoman Janissaries, we now journey back to the very dawn of Western literature, to a war that defined heroism itself. Our 25th enigmatic myth takes us to the burning plains of Troy and into the hearts of two legendary adversaries, Achilles and Hector. Their epic struggle, immortalized in Homer's Iliad, is far more than a simple tale of battle. It is a profound exploration of the human condition, where the choices of flawed men are magnified by the meddling of capricious gods, creating a timeless drama of rage, honor, and inescapable fate. The myth of Achilles' near invulnerability is one of the most famous in all of mythology. The story goes that his mother, the sea nymph Thetis, sought to make her infant son immortal by dipping him into the sacred river Styx. She held him by one heel, leaving that single spot untouched by the magical waters and thus vulnerable. This single point of weakness would become his ultimate undoing when a poisoned arrow, guided by the god Apollo, found its mark. But to see this only as a story about a physical weakness is to miss its deeper, more human meaning. In the Iliad itself, Homer never explicitly mentions this heel. His vulnerability is not physical but emotional. His rage, his menace, is both his driving force and his fatal flaw. When the Greek commander Agamemnon dishonors him by taking his war prize, the enslaved woman Briseis, Achilles' pride is wounded. He withdraws from the battle, allowing his own comrades to be slaughtered, all to prove a point. His invincibility in combat is useless if his honor is not recognized. The myth of the heel, which developed later, is a perfect physical metaphor for this psychological truth. Even the greatest among us have a hidden weakness, often born from the very love, a mother's grasp that sought to protect us. Standing in stark contrast to this fiery, self-destructive hero is Hector, the noble prince of Troy. While Achilles fights for personal glory and vindication, Hector fights for his home, his family, and his people. He is the complete warrior statesman, a loving husband to Andromache and a doting father to his young son, Astyanax. In one of the most moving scenes in all of literature, Hector reaches for his boy, who is frightened by the horsehair plume on his father's helmet. Hector laughs, takes off the helmet, and holds his child, knowing he may never see him again. This moment of tender humanity makes his eventual fate all the more tragic. Hector is a hero bound by duty, not pride. He knows the war is a terrible mistake. He knows Troy is likely doomed, and he even admits his brother Paris was wrong to abduct Helen. Yet he fights on, not for personal glory, but because it is his responsibility to defend his city. He is the moral center of the poem, a good man trapped in a bad war, making his downfall the true tragedy of the Iliad. This legendary conflict was long thought to be pure poetic invention, a foundational myth with no basis in fact, that changed in the 19th century with the obsessive quest of a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann. Convinced that Homer's epic was historical truth, he used the Iliad as a treasure map. Against all scholarly opinion, he began excavating a tell, a large man-made mound, at a site in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik. To the astonishment of the world, he uncovered the layered remains of not one, but multiple cities built atop one another. One of these layers, now known as Troy 7a, showed signs of violent destruction, collapsed walls, skeletons in the streets, and evidence of a great fire dating roughly to the time frame traditionally given for the Trojan War. While Schliemann's methods were crude and his claim to have found Priam's treasure is now viewed with skepticism, he fundamentally changed history. He proved that a powerful city, situated in a location that perfectly matched Homer's description, did exist and was destroyed by war. The myth suddenly had a setting in the real world, blurring forever the line between Homer's poetic genius and a potential historical core. The cultural impact of these two archetypes is immeasurable. Achilles gave us the concept of the tragic, rage-fueled hero, a figure who would be echoed in everything from the vengeful heroes of Shakespeare to the brooding anti-heroes of modern cinema. His name provides the term Achilles' heel, describing a critical weakness in any system or person. Hector, meanwhile, became the model of the selfless patriot, the noble defender who sacrifices everything for a cause greater than himself. Their duel outside the walls of Troy is the ultimate clash of these two ideals, individual glory versus collective duty. Achilles wins the fight, but Homer makes it clear that Hector wins the moral victory. Even the gods, watching from Olympus, acknowledge the tragedy of his death. Ultimately, the myth of Achilles and Hector endures because it teaches us that heroism is not a single quality, but a spectrum of choices. Achilles represents the brutal, awesome power of the individual will, while Hector represents the solemn, heartbreaking burden of social responsibility. Their story is a lesson in the futility of war and the inevitability of fate, but also a celebration of the profound humanity that can be found even in the midst of senseless violence. They are two sides of the same coin, reminding us that every hero, no matter how glorious or noble, is ultimately mortal, vulnerable, and forever subject to the whims of the gods and the turning of time. From the legendary duel between Greek and Trojan champions, we now cross the Mediterranean to a land where the lines between history and legend were drawn not just by poets, but by crusaders and kings. Our 26th enigmatic myth takes us to the sun-baked battlefields of medieval Spain to confront the phantom warriors of the Moors. In the Christian legends of the Reconquista, these were not mere mortal opponents. They were often depicted as a supernatural, almost demonic force, eternal foes wielding dark magic and ancient curses, a spectral enemy that gave the centuries-long struggle a sense of apocalyptic stakes. This mythologized portrayal did not emerge from a vacuum. It was a powerful tool of propaganda, carefully crafted to dehumanize a sophisticated adversary and frame a long, complex territorial conflict as a holy war. Christian chroniclers, writing to rally support and secure funding from popes and northern nobles, had a vested interest in painting the Muslim rulers of Al-Andalus as monstrous invaders. They were not just political rivals, they were painted as infidels, heretics, and servants of darkness. This narrative transformed a soldier killed in battle from a casualty of war into a Christian martyr, and it turned the Moorish warrior into a faceless symbol of evil, making it easier to justify relentless warfare and the often brutal treatment of conquered populations. The myth served a crucial psychological purpose. It unified a fractured collection of Christian kingdoms against a common, terrifying enemy. turning the slow, grinding reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula into a sacred crusade for the very soul of Europe. This deliberately frightening image gave rise to specific, chilling folktales. Moorish sorcerers were said to command jinn, elemental spirits made of smokeless fire, to sow confusion and terror on the battlefield. Their leaders were sometimes described as monstrous giants or wielders of enchanted, cursed blades that could never be broken. There were stories of entire Moorish armies vanishing into the mist of a sudden desert wind, only to reappear miles behind Christian lines as if they had teleported through demonic aid. The most persistent legends spoke of ancient curses protecting Moorish cities. It was said that the gates of certain fortified palaces would never fall to a Christian hand, guarded by magic older than Islam itself, and that any knight who tried to force them would be struck down by an unseen, malevolent force. These stories were not just campfire tales, they were believed by many common soldiers, adding a layer of supernatural dread to the very real dangers of combat. To separate this mythical boogeyman from historical reality is to reveal a culture that was, in many ways, the opposite of the monstrous caricature. Al-Andalus, particularly under the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba, was a beacon of learning, tolerance, and breathtaking advancement while much of Europe was mired in the Dark Ages. Moorish Spain was a multicultural society where Muslims, Christians, and Jews often lived and worked side by side in relative peace, a period known as convivencia. Their warriors were not mindless fanatics, they were part of a highly organized and sophisticated military tradition. The Andalusian cavalry, for example, was a formidable force known for its speed and mobility, often wearing polished steel armor that shone brilliantly in the sun, which might have contributed to their almost magical, gleaming appearance on the battlefield. Their tactics were studied and feared, and their engineers were masterful, constructing some of the most impressive fortifications the world had ever seen. The real threat they posed was not dark magic, but superior military science, profound cultural confidence, and a rich, complex civilization that had deeply rooted itself in the Iberian soil. The ultimate symbol of this cultural fusion, and perhaps the greatest irony of the Reconquista, is the legendary figure of El Cid himself. As we explored earlier, the Christian hero Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, the icon of the crusade against the Moors, actually spent a significant portion of his career fighting for Muslim rulers. After his exile from Castile, he entered the service of the Moorish king of Zaragoza, leading the king's armies against both Christian and Muslim rivals. This fact was conveniently scrubbed from his later mythos, as it completely undermines the neat, black and white narrative of the Holy War. The real history of the peninsula was a messy, shifting chessboard of alliances of convenience, where faith was often secondary to political and military gain. Christian kings frequently allied with Moorish Taifa states against rival Christian kingdoms, and vice versa. The myth of the phantom Moorish horde was necessary to obscure this uncomfortable truth, to paper over the fact that the eternal foe was often a temporary ally, a trading partner, or a respected neighbor. The legacy of this myth is a long and damaging one, casting a shadow that extends centuries beyond the fall of Granada in 1492. The depiction of Moors as monstrous, inhuman others became a foundational element of the Black Legend and was used to justify the brutal policies of the Spanish Inquisition, the forced conversions and expulsions of the Moriscos, and later colonial endeavors in the Americas and Africa. This manufactured image provided a ready-made template for racism and religious intolerance, a way to legitimize oppression by framing the other as not just different but inherently evil. Yet the physical evidence left behind tells a different, far more eloquent story. The stunning architecture of the Alhambra Palace in Granada, with its intricate arabesques and serene courtyards, does not speak of a dark, cursed culture, but of one obsessed with beauty, mathematics, and the creation of paradise on earth. The Great Mosque of Cordoba, with its hauntingly beautiful forest of arches, stands as a permanent testament to a faith that sought to inspire awe through grandeur and grace, not terror. These stones whisper the truth that the legends tried to silence, that the real phantom was not the Moorish warrior, but the simplistic myth itself, a ghost story created to serve a political purpose, forever obscuring the rich, complicated, and profoundly human history of a land that was for centuries a vibrant meeting point of worlds. From the ghostly armies of the Moorish Reconquista, we now journey north to the deep, deciduous shadows of Sherwood Forest, where a different kind of resistance took root. Our 27th enigmatic myth is that of the immortal outlaws Robin Hood and his merry men. This is not the story of a king or a general, but of a yeoman, a skilled archer who became the eternal champion of the common folk. His legend a promise that justice could always be found, even if it operated outside the law, in the dappled light of an ancient woodland. The core of the Robin Hood legend is deceptively simple. A nobleman wrongfully dispossessed of his lands takes to the greenwood, gathering a band of like-minded outcasts. From this forest sanctuary, they wage a guerrilla war against the corrupt sheriff of Nottingham and the privileged classes, robbing from the rich to give to the poor. This narrative of righteous banditry taps into a universal and timeless human desire for social equity, for a balancing of the scales in a world that often feels rigged for the powerful. The setting of Sherwood Forest is crucial to the myth. It represents a space outside the control of the crown, a lawless zone where the normal rules of feudal society are inverted. Here, a common archer can be a king, and the true villain is the one who wears the official title. Unraveling the historical origins of this folk hero is a task that has occupied historians for centuries, and the truth is, there is no single Robin Hood. The name itself was a common medieval nickname, and court records from the 13th and 14th centuries mention various outlaws and fugitives bearing variations of it. One candidate is a man named Robert Hard, a fugitive recorded in the York Assizes in 1225. Another theory points to an earlier figure, perhaps a disaffected Saxon nobleman resisting the Norman yoke following the conquest of 1066. This idea weaves Robin into a broader narrative of ethnic and class struggle, making him a symbol of Saxon resentment against their Norman overlords. The legend likely absorbed the deeds and personalities of numerous real-life outlaws and popular heroes over decades, their stories blending around campfires and in taverns until they coalesced into the single, iconic figure we know today. The earliest surviving ballads, like A Jest of Robin Hood, don't even place him in the time of Richard the Lionheart. That connection with the noble king returning from the Crusades to restore order was a later addition that further refined the myth into a tale of loyal opposition, fighting not against the king, but for the true spirit of the kingdom against its corrupt stewards. What truly cements Robin's status as an immortal warrior, however, is the enduring myth of his never-ending struggle. The stories never conclude with his final victory or his peaceful retirement. Instead, the legend often cycles. He is perpetually outwitting the sheriff, his exploits a continuous performance of hope for the oppressed. This cyclical nature suggests that the fight against injustice is itself eternal. You may win a battle, but the war is never truly over. This is powerfully embodied in the famous epitaph that first appeared in an 18th century ballad. He that for slander shed his blood, / Robin Hood, Earl of Huntingdon. / lies underneath this little stone, / no archer was like him so good, / his wildness named him Robin Hood, / full 13 years and something more, / these northern parts he vexed with sore. / such outlaws as he and his men / may England never know again. Yet, even this inscription feels less like an ending and more like a yearning. The people refused to let him die. Folklore insisted that his grave was cursed or that it could not contain him, and tales persisted of his apparition being seen in the forest, a green-clad ghost ensuring the legacy of resistance lived on. His band of merry men are not mere sidekicks, they are essential facets of his mythic power, each representing a different aspect of the outlaw life and the common man's skills. Little John is his loyal lieutenant and physical might, a gentle giant whose staff-fighting prowess is legendary. Friar Tuck is the spiritual justification, a man of God who blesses their endeavors, highlighting the corruption of the established church and aligning their cause with a higher morality. Will Scarlet represents the noble flair and perhaps a hot-headed youth, while Much the Miller's son grounds the band in the gritty reality of the peasantry. Together, they form a complete micro-society in the forest, a brotherhood based on merit and loyalty that stands in stark contrast to the rigid, inherited hierarchy of the world outside. Their merriment, their feasting, their contests of skill, their laughter in the face of danger is a radical act. It signifies that true freedom and joy are found not in wealth or status, but in community and a righteous cause. This is why Robin Hood remains the ultimate warrior for the oppressed. He doesn't lead a revolution to overthrow the system. He operates within its cracks, puncturing the pomposity of the powerful with wit and an unerring arrow. He is the cheeky underdog who always gets the last laugh. His weapon of choice, the longbow, is itself symbolic of a democratic spirit. While only the nobility could afford the training and armor of a knight, a skilled archer could come from any social class, and his skill could topple a mounted knight from a distance. Robin's mastery of the bow is a metaphor for the power of the common people when they are focused and determined. His immortality lies in his endless adaptability. Every generation reinvents Robin Hood for its own needs, from the Errol Flynn swashbuckler to the gritty Sean Connery revisionism, the animated fox of Disney to the tragic hero of the BBC series. He is a blank slate upon which we project our own contemporary struggles against injustice, a permanent reminder that the spirit of resistance is always alive, waiting in the greenwood for when it is needed most. Emerging from the greenwood's myth of social justice, we now step into the cold, stone corridors of a different kind of brother, Hood, one forged not in the shade of trees, but in the blistering sun of the Holy Land. Our 28th enigmatic myth is that of the eternal defenders, the Knights Templar. This is not merely the story of a medieval military order. It is the birth of the ultimate conspiracy, a legend that claims these warrior monks were the guardians of mankind's greatest secrets, and that their brotherhood never truly died, but simply vanished into the shadows, protecting their sacred charge to this very day. The historical origins of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon are in themselves the stuff of legend. Founded in Jerusalem around 1119, in the wake of the First Crusade, their initial mission was breathtakingly simple yet impossibly noble: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. The roads from the coast to Jerusalem were perilous, plagued by bandits and marauders, and the nascent kingdom needed a dedicated force to keep those pathways safe. King Baldwin II granted them lodgings on the Temple Mount, in what was believed to be the ruins of Solomon's temple, and from this potent location they took their famous name. But they were far more than just holy bodyguards. They took a triple vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience, becoming monks of the sword, a unique fusion of the clerical and the martial that had never been seen before in Christendom. Their defining trait, the one that would launch 1,000 myths, was their ferocious efficacy in battle. They were the special forces of their age, renowned for their discipline, their courage, and their unwavering rule. Never surrender, never retreat unless outnumbered 3-1, and fight to the last man to protect the holy relics of their faith. This fearsome reputation was the engine for their meteoric rise to power. They became the first international banking corporation, a system born from the practical needs of pilgrims. A traveler could deposit funds at a Templar preceptory in London and receive a coded letter of credit to withdraw the same amount in Jerusalem, a revolutionary service that protected them from highway robbery. This network of fortified castles, treasuries, and ships made them unimaginably wealthy and powerful, answering only to the Pope himself. They were the bankers to kings and the enforcers of papal will, a state within a state shrouded in secrecy. Their rituals, necessary for security in a hostile world, were conducted behind closed doors, and this secrecy became the fertile ground where speculation and legend would run wild. What were they really doing in their chapters? What secrets had they uncovered in the tunnels beneath Solomon's temple? This aura of mystery made their fall all the more shocking and dramatic. By the early 14th century, the Crusader states had been lost, and the Templars' purpose was called into question. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, saw an opportunity. In a meticulously coordinated dawn raid on Friday, October 13, 1307, he had every Templar in France arrested simultaneously on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and sodomy. The confessions were extracted under brutal torture, and while many later recanted, it was enough for the Pope to disband the order. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in Paris, and as the flames consumed him, he reportedly cursed both the king and the Pope, summoning them to meet him before God within a year. In a twist that fueled the myth of Templar supernatural power, both men were indeed dead within the year. This dramatic end did not erase the Templars, it immortalized them. Their sudden disappearance, their vast wealth that was never found, and their leader's dying curse created the perfect vacuum for legend to rush in. The central, enduring myth is that they never truly disbanded. The story goes that their fleet, based at La Rochelle, vanished the night before the arrests, taking with it their legendary treasure, not just gold, but something far more valuable. Perhaps it was the Holy Grail itself, the cup of the Last Supper, or maybe it was the Ark of the Covenant discovered in the ruins beneath the Temple Mount. Some suggest it was ancient Gnostic Gospels that challenged the very foundations of church doctrine, or even the bloodline of Christ himself. The speculation is endless. This myth proposes that the order simply went underground, transforming from a public military force into a secret society, protecting their charge through the centuries. This narrative is kept alive by persistent rumors and sightings. Stories persist of men in Templar white guarding a remote chapel in Scotland. Others whisper that certain banking families and fraternal orders are the direct inheritors of their secrets and their mission, that the true power of the Templars simply shifted shape, moving from the battlefields of the Levant to the boardrooms of the modern world. This enigmatic legacy has been powerfully amplified by popular culture, from the cryptic puzzles of the Da Vinci Code to the epic adventures of Indiana Jones. These stories tap into a deep, universal fascination with hidden history and the idea that a select few guard earth-shattering truths. The Templars have become the ultimate archetype of the secret guardian, the knight not of a king but of a mystery. Their story resonates because it is a potent mix of verifiable history and unverifiable speculation, of known courage and unknown purpose. They represent the tantalizing possibility that history is not what we are taught, that just beneath the surface of accepted facts lies a hidden war, a silent struggle for mankind's most profound secrets, fought by eternal defenders whose vow transcends centuries. They are the ghost in the machine of history, a permanent reminder that the greatest treasures are not those we can see, but those we can only wonder about. Across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, we find a warrior tradition where the spiritual and the physical are so deeply intertwined that they become one and the same. Our 29th enigmatic myth takes us to Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, and into the world of the Maori Toa. These were not just fighters, they were vessels of divine power, warriors who could call upon the gods themselves to flow through their limbs, granting them strength beyond human limits and a state of spiritual protection that made them seem utterly untouchable on the battlefield. The foundation of this belief is the Maori concept of mana and tapu. Mana is a form of spiritual authority, power, and prestige that is both inherited and earned through great deeds. Toa's mana was directly tied to his prowess, his honor, and his connection to his ancestors. tapu is a state of sacred prohibition, a spiritual charge that makes something or someone set apart powerful and often dangerous. Before battle, a Toa would undergo rituals to become tapu, to elevate himself from a mere man into a conduit for supernatural force. This wasn't a metaphor, it was a deeply held spiritual reality. To violate this sacred state, to break the tapu, was to invite catastrophic spiritual consequences, which is why the rituals surrounding combat were just as important as the combat itself. This spiritual preparation often involved calling upon the power of Atua or gods. A Toa might invoke Tumatoanga, the god of war and humankind, for courage and skill in hand-to-hand combat. For strategy and The Chinese letter Japanese letter Sakaru avoid art of deception, he might call upon the trickster Moi. But the most powerful invocation was through Wakapapa, the recitation of his genealogical lineage. By calling out the names of his ancestors all the way back to the gods and the very creation of the world, the Toa was not just remembering his family, he was summoning their accumulated mana, drawing the strength of generations into his own being. In this heightened state, he was no longer fighting alone. Every blow he struck was landed with the weight of his entire lineage behind it. This belief manifested in the legendary concept of the warrior becoming tapu and thus untouchable. There are numerous accounts from both Maori oral history and early European observers of warriors performing seemingly impossible feats. A Toa charged with this sacred energy might walk unscathed through a volley of spears. He might exhibit impossible strength, shattering enemy weapons with his mere hands or moving with a speed that made him a blur. The most famous physical expression of this spiritual state is the haka, often misunderstood globally as merely a war dance. While performed by groups today, the haka peru was a specific war haka performed by warriors immediately before battle. Its purpose was not to entertain but to transform. With wide, rolling eyes, pukana, ferocious facial contortions, and thunderous, synchronized movements, the warriors were not just intimidating their enemies, they were ritually summoning their own war spirit, shedding their everyday humanity and inviting the Atua to possess them, to make their bodies a weapon of divine fury. The historical context for these beliefs was the intense, often intertribal warfare known as Ungapakanga, fought over land, resources, and honor using formidable weapons like the short, crushing Mir Paunamu greenstone club and the striking staff Teaha. In this world where a single battle could determine the fate of an entire Iwi tribe, psychological warfare was paramount. The belief that your enemy was not merely a man but a divinely empowered entity was a terrifyingly effective weapon. It could break an opposing force's will to fight before the first blow was even struck. Today, in a world where traditional warfare has ceased, the legend of the Toa is more vital than ever as a guardian of indigenous identity. The values these stories embody: courage Maya, loyalty Pumau, leadership Rangaturatanga, and respect Wakot for one's ancestors and traditions are the bedrock of modern Maori culture. The haka, now performed at weddings, funerals, and to welcome distinguished guests, is a living performance of that warrior spirit, a way to physically connect with the mana of the ancestors and assert a powerful cultural presence on the world stage. The myths of the Toa ensure that the language, the values, and the spiritual worldview of the Maori are not relics of the past but a vibrant, dynamic force. They tell a new generation that to be a warrior is not necessarily to wage war, but to carry the strength of your people within you, to walk with the dignity of your ancestors, and to face any challenge with the unshakable knowledge that you are never, ever alone. And so we arrive at our final enigmatic myth, number 30, a legend not confined to the ancient past but one we are actively writing in our own time. This is the myth of the modern warrior, a figure who, despite the glare of modern media and the cold logic of technology, is still shrouded in stories that echo the oldest tales of supernatural aid and immortal legacy. We have traded spears for smart rifles and shields for body armor, yet the human heart still beats with the same need to find something transcendent in the ultimate act of human sacrifice. Consider the most powerful modern myth of all, the tomb of the unknown soldier. This is not a grave for one man, but a monument for everyone. By burying an unidentified warrior, we perform a profound act of collective storytelling. We imbue this single, anonymous body with the spirit of all who have fallen without recognition. He becomes an eternal soldier, forever standing his post, forever representing the pure, selfless ideal of service. Visitors speak in hushed tones, not just out of respect, but from a sense of standing in the presence of a timeless, collective spirit. We project onto this unknown figure all the virtues we associate with the warrior: courage, loyalty, sacrifice, creating a secular saint for the modern age, a demigod in a crypt, proving that our need for an immortal, archetypal guardian has not faded with the centuries. On the more visceral battlefield, stories persist that defy the sterile explanations of military reports. Veterans of intense, close-quarters combat sometimes speak of events that feel ripped from an ancient saga. There are widespread accounts from numerous conflicts of a mysterious third man, an unseen presence that appears in a moment of dire need to guide, protect, or offer comfort to a soldier on the verge of collapse, only to vanish without a trace once the danger has passed. Others tell of premonitions so vivid they caused a whole unit to change its route, accidentally avoiding a perfectly laid ambush. In an age of thermal scopes and satellite surveillance, grunts still talk about angel fire, enemy mortar, rounds that inexplicably fail to detonate, or a sudden, impossibly dense fog that rolls in to conceal a retreat. Whether explained by adrenaline, trauma, or coincidence, the fact that these stories are so fervently believed and shared points to a deeper truth. They are the modern equivalent of seeing the Valkyries over a Viking battlefield or feeling the presence of a patron saint in a medieval charge. In the face of overwhelming chaos, the human psyche still reaches for a narrative of divine intervention, a sign that one is not alone in the storm of steel. This compulsion to mythologize stems from a fundamental human need to make meaning out of the unimaginable. Warfare is, by its nature, a descent into primal chaos, a realm of random violence, terror, and loss. To simply accept it as a series of chance events is psychologically unbearable. By weaving a myth around a warrior, whether he is the unknown in the tomb or the comrade who cheated death, we impose a narrative of order and purpose onto that chaos. We assert that such immense courage and sacrifice cannot be for nothing. It must be part of a larger, more meaningful story, one that perhaps we are not yet equipped to fully understand. The myth becomes a psychological shield, protecting us from the abyss of nihilism that war represents. Ultimately, the enduring thread that connects the Terracotta army to the unknown soldier, the berserker to the green beret, is our timeless search for the hero who transcends mortality. We are biological creatures bound by time, acutely aware of our own fragility. The warrior who willingly stares into the face of death on our behalf becomes the ultimate expression of our desire to conquer that fragility. We cannot become immortal ourselves, so we create stories of those who are either through spiritual legacy, through supernatural protection, or through the eternal memory of their deeds. These myths are not lies or simple fantasies. They are the highest form of tribute. They are the language we use to speak about the unspeakable, to honor the unbearable, and to assure ourselves that the values we hold most dear, courage, honor, and sacrifice, are not fleeting human inventions but permanent, enduring forces in the universe. The warrior may fall, but the myth is forever, and in that forever we find a comfort that transcends time, a promise that the best of us never truly die. From the silent, spiritual sentinels of Qin Shi Huang's tomb to the cybernetic resilience of the modern soldier, these 30 enigmatic myths form a breathtaking tapestry of human aspiration. We've journeyed across continents and centuries, from the foggy highlands of Scotland to the sun-drenched plains of Persia, meeting warriors who channeled the fury of bears, lovers who formed unbreakable bonds, and prophets who communed with the divine. Each legend, in its own unique way, grapples with the same profound, universal themes: the nature of courage, the price of loyalty, and our deep, unyielding desire to etch our existence into eternity, to become more than just flesh and blood. These stories are far more than simple entertainment or historical footnotes. They are a fundamental part of our collective psyche, a mirror reflecting our highest ideals and our deepest fears. The myth of the invulnerable hero, from Achilles to the Maori Toa, speaks to our own vulnerability and our longing for protection in a dangerous world. The tales of unshakable loyalty, from the 47 Ronin to the sacred band of Thebes, remind us that our strongest bonds are those forged in shared purpose and sacrifice. And the enduring ghosts, from the Phantom Legion of the Ninth to Stonewall Jackson's Lost Cause, reveal our powerful need to believe that love for one's homeland and the memory of great deeds can never truly be erased by time or tragedy. What these myths ultimately teach us is that a warrior's greatest weapon was never just his sword or his spear. It was his story. The most formidable armies could be defeated, the strongest fortresses could fall, but a well-told legend was immortal. It could inspire centuries of resistance, define a national identity, or offer comfort to the oppressed. These narratives gave meaning to chaos, purpose to suffering, and a face to the anonymous thousands who have fought and died throughout history. They transformed a mortal man into a symbol, ensuring that his spirit would continue to march long after his bones had turned to dust. So as we close this chapter on these timeless warriors, we are left not with final answers, but with a deeper appreciation for the mysteries they represent. Their lives may be shrouded in the mists of time, but the legends they inspired stand as permanent monuments to the human spirit. They remind us that the greatest battles are often fought not just with swords, but with stories that stand the test of time. Now we want to hear from you which of these enigmatic myths resonated most deeply. Was it the unwavering loyalty of the Ronin, the supernatural fury of the berserker, or the tragic defiance of Spartacus? Share your favorite warrior legend in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the past, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more explorations into history's